All right, we should probably get started then. Welcome everyone to the Planning Committee meeting for Thursday, September 22nd, meeting number 70, the second last Planning Committee meeting of the term. We acknowledge that Ottawa is located on unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation, whose culture and presence have nurtured and continue to nurture this land. Il est important de souligner que la ville d'Ottawa se trouve sur un territoire non cédé de la nation algonquienne Anishinaabe, dont la culture et la présence sont enrichies et continuent d'enrichir ces terres. We have no regrets today, and I'll ask Kelly if she can help with our roll call.
Councillor Brockington.
Good morning.
Councillor Cloutier.
Présent.
Councillor Curry.
Here.
Councillor Dudas.
See.
Councillor Hubley.
Here.
Councillor Kitts.
Here.
Councillor Leeper.
Good morning.
Councillor Menard.
Here.
Councillor Tierney.
Here.
Councillor El-Shantiri. Chair Moffat.
Here.
And Chair Gower.
Here.
You have quorum.
Thank you, Kelly, and good morning as well to Councillor Kavanaugh and Councillor Fleury, who have items on the agenda in their wards. Thank you for joining us. This is a public meeting to consider the proposed comprehensive official plan and zoning bylaw amendments listed as items 4.2, 5.1, and 5.3 on today's agenda. For the items just mentioned, only those who make oral submissions today or written submissions before the amendments are adopted may appeal the matter to the Ontario Land Tribunal. In addition, the applicant may appeal the matter to the Ontario Land Tribunal if council does not adopt an amendment within 90 days of receipt of the application for a zoning bylaw amendment and 120 days for an official plan amendment. To submit written comments on these amendments prior to their consideration by City Council on October 5th, 2022, please email or call the committee or council coordinator. Are there any declarations of interest today? I'm seeing none. Confirmation of minutes. We have minutes from 2 meetings to confirm. The first is the minutes from meetings number 68 from August 25th. Are those minutes confirmed?
Confirmed.
Confirmed.
And the minutes for meeting number 69 on September 8th, 2022, are they confirmed?
Confirmed.
Confirmed.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we're going to go through the agenda and see if there's any that we can carry and see which ones we need to hold for further discussion. There are 2 items that were deferred from the previous meeting, so they're first on the agenda. The first is a development charge complaint for 1354, 1376 Carling Avenue. That's in River Ward. Now, my understanding is the applicants have not registered to speak today. Is that correct, Kelly?
That's correct, Chair.
Okay. Does anyone wish to hold this item? The staff's recommendation is that we dismiss the complaint. Does anyone wish to hold this item for discussion or questions to staff?
Chair Gower, I just want to clarify, you said the applicant, you mean the persons who are bringing the development charge complaint have not registered?
Yes, correct. Thank you. Thank you for clarifying. It's the complainant's representatives have not registered to speak.
So they have not registered, and the recommendation by staff is to dismiss the complaint. Got it. Thank you.
That's correct. That's correct. So any requests to hold this item? So I'm seeing none. So the report recommendation is that Planning Committee recommend that Council dismiss the development charge complaint in respect of 1354 and 1376 Carling Avenue. So are those, is that report recommendation carried?
Carried.
Carried. Okay, thank you. Item 4.2 is an official plan and zoning bylaw amendment for 1071 Ambleside Drive in Bay Ward. We will hold this one because there are delegations registered and the applicants are here as well. So we'll hold that. Item number 5.1 is zoning bylaw amendment for 197 and 201 Wilbrod Street. And item 5.2 is application for new construction at 197 and 201 Wilbrod Street, properties designated under Part 5 of the Ontario Heritage Act as part of the Sandy Hill West Heritage Conservation District. We have no delegations registered for either of these items and no correspondence on file. Are there any requests from committee members to hold this item for questions or discussion? I'm seeing now, Councillor Fleury.
Mr. Chair, a very quick question on timing for demo. We had approved demo a while back, and I see the buildings are still up with great community concern. So we have the applicant up. I don't know if they're able to provide a timing for demo.
Sure. Tim Bede is here from FOTEN. I see Tim. Good morning, Tim.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and committee. Thank you, Councillor Fleury. I believe that the timeline for demolition is still being determined. My colleague Barry Podolsky, who's the lead architect on the file, may be able to provide more detail on timing and timeframes around that aspect of this development.
Okay. Barry, good morning.
Good morning. Yes, I can confirm that the owner of the property, Empire Holdings, has entered into a contract with Demolition Plus to demolish the two buildings, and that start date is intended to be sometime in late October.
Thank you, Barry. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. So I know the applicants are here. If the committee is prepared to carry this item, do you wish to speak to it?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. No, if you're willing to carry this item, no, we don't need to speak to this.
Okay, thank you. So on the first one, 5.1, the zoning bylaw amendment for 197 and 201 Wilbrod Street, are the report recommendations carried?
Carried.
Carried.
Carried, thank you. And for item 5.2, application for new construction at 197 and 201 Wilbrod Street, properties designated under Part 5 of the Ontario Heritage Act as part of the Sandy Hill West Heritage Conservation District, are the report recommendations carried?
Carried.
Carried.
Carried, thank you. Item number 5.3 is a zoning bylaw amendment at 5725 Fernbank Road. That's here in Stittsville. We have no delegations registered and no correspondence on this file. Do any committee members wish to hold this item? I certainly do not. We have representatives from the applicants here: Greg Winters, Novatech, Robert Tran, Novatech, and Vincent Denham from CRT. If the committee is prepared to carry this item, do you wish to speak on it?
Good morning, Mr. Chair. We do not.
Okay. Good morning, Robert. Thank you very much. So are the report recommendations carried?
Carried.
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 Thank you. We have one additional item that we would have to have a motion to add to the agenda. It's related to an appeal for 933 Gladstone and 1030 Somerset. I believe Chair Moffat has a motion to add this to our agenda.
I do. So whereas an appeal concerning zoning bylaw amendment to 933 Gladstone Avenue and part of 1033 Somerset Street is before the Ontario Land Tribunal, and whereas an appeal concerning a zoning bylaw amendment to 933 Gladstone Avenue and part of, that's weird, I swear to God, this is the same thing twice, is before the Ontario Land Tribunal. And whereas the possibility of a settlement on this matter might be made on the basis of the designation of 933 Gladstone Avenue and part of 1033 Somerset Street as a Class 4 site within the meaning of the Environmental Noise Guideline, Stationary and Transportation Sources Approval and Planning, and the City of Ottawa Environmental Noise Control Guidelines, therefore be it resolved that Planning Committee add report ACS 2022 PIE EDP 0031 as an item of other business to the September 22nd, 2022 meeting of Planning Committee. This is that Gladstone Village area, and there was just an appeal between the Canadian Banknote Company and regarding some proximity issues. So staff have been doing it for quite a while. Councillor McKenney is well aware.
Okay, so the motion to add this to the agenda, is it carried?
Or can I just ask a question, please?
Absolutely.
The motion is to add a report to the agenda, but what is the action item that we would be considering?
Well, the report has been circulated, I believe, to committee members yesterday. And I think what we should do here is add this to the agenda, but hold it for questions or to staff, because there may be a bit of background that committee members will be interested in.
If there's something that the committee is being asked to consider as far as supporting or not,
yeah,
if that actual wording can be circulated before we get to the actual item, that would be appreciated.
Yeah, absolutely. We can do that. So on the motion to add to the agenda, is it carried?
Carried.
Great.
Carried. And I'll ask if the clerk's team can circulate the report and the recommendations to members. So we'll hold that and come back to that. And that takes us through the agenda. So we're going to go back to the first item that we held, which was the official plan and zoning bylaw amendment for 1071 Ambleside Drive. As I mentioned, we do have 7 public delegations registered to speak. So what we'll do is we'll start with a brief staff presentation to give us an overview of the application. Then we'll go to a presentation from the applicants, and then we'll hear from the delegations, and then we'll come back to the applicants for questions, and then city staff for questions. Allison Hamlin is here and will walk us through the presentation. Good morning, Allison.
Good morning, Chair Gower and Chair Moffat, members of Planning Committee. I can give the presentation.
All right, we'll bring it up on screen and here we go.
Okay, this is an official plan amendment and zoning bylaw amendment application at 1071 Ambleside Drive. Planning staff are recommending that Council approve the official plan amendment and zoning bylaw amendments to permit a high-rise building of 32 stories and with approximately 312 dwelling units. Next slide, please. The subject property is located north of Ambleside Drive and west of New Orchard Avenue North, as shown with the red star in this image. It's located 150 meters west of the New Orchard Light Rail Transit Station, which is currently under construction and is shown with the blue star. The site is currently occupied by a 13-story residential building, and the new building is being proposed on the surface parking lot at the rear of the site. Next slide, please. Surrounding land uses include high-rise residential buildings to the west, low and mid-rise residential buildings, and a retirement home and car dealerships to the east, a community center and a car dealership to the south, and the National Capital Commission Capital Parkway and Sir John A. Macdonald Parkway to the north. Here's a view of the site looking north towards the river. Next slide, please. And here's a view of the site looking south. The new construction would be on the river side of the existing 13-story building on the subject property. This image shows the intensification that's happening in this area. And in terms of community consultation, this is a controversial project. Councillor Kavanagh had held an online community information meeting through Zoom in November of 2021. Through the review process, approximately 200 comments were submitted. There were a few in support, but the majority had concerns about height, density, obstruction of views, parking and traffic impacts, and the overall building design. Next slide, please. This image shows a concept plan. The existing zoning permits a maximum floor space index of 3 across the entire site. The amendments would enable for a redistribution of this density. A taller tower with a narrower floor plate is a more desirable built form. It minimizes the obstruction of views and it allows for more landscape space at grade. There is an appropriate separation distance between the high-rise buildings. It's in accordance with the city's urban design guidelines for high-rise buildings. There are minimal impacts to the low-rise communities further south, and the proposed density does not exceed the 3 FSI through this proposal. The request is for an increase in height, but the density is allowed under the existing zoning. Next slide, please. This image shows the official plan designation. The site is designated general urban area in the in-force official plan. High-rise buildings are permitted in this designation, but a site-specific amendment is required for the 32-story height. Next slide, please. The subject site is located within the inner urban transect with an evolving neighborhood overlay within the new official plan. The policies in the new official plan encourage tower in the park sites like this to infill on their underutilized lands and to allow for the development of a full range and choice of housing to support the evolution towards 15-minute neighborhoods. Next slide, please. This is the Cleary and New Orchard area site-specific policies, the schedule is showing, which will be carried forward into the new official plan as the Sherburne and New Orchard secondary plan, which would reflect the change of name for the station. The subject site is designated apartment neighborhood by the area site-specific policies. Redevelopment of underutilized land within this area is encouraged in a way that integrates the existing tower into the proposed redevelopments and complements the adjacent urban fabric. Next slide, please. So that's the policy. And then in terms of guidelines, staff looked at the urban design guidelines for transit-oriented development as the site is within 600 meters of a transit station. The guidelines aim to provide for a mix of uses to complement transit users and the local community and to ensure that the built form is designed and oriented to facilitate and encourage transit use. Staff also looked at the urban design guidelines for high-rise buildings. In this case, the guidelines have been addressed to ensure compatibility through massing, setbacks, and transitions by including a podium, by separating the towers by at least 23 meters, by orienting the towers to minimize shadow, and by designing with compact floor plates. Next slide, please. So in conclusion, staff are recommending that committee and council approve an amendment to the Cleary New Orchard area site-specific policies and to the zoning bylaw to permit a high-rise building with a height of up to 32 stories, and in the zoning to bring forward increased bike parking requirements and the existing exception provisions of the zone. That's it. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks very much, Allison. Now I forgot there is a technical amendment that we should have introduced off the get-go. Chair Moffat is the mover on this, and there it is on screen. Scott.
Yeah, whereas the application associated with report ACS 2022 PIE PS 0095 seeks to permit a 32-story apartment building with 312 dwelling units and 315 underground parking spaces. And whereas certain technical modifications to the zoning schedule have been identified as being required by staff, and therefore be it resolved that with respect to the report, Planning Committee substitute document 5 with the revised version enclosed, therefore be it further resolved that there be no further notice pursuant to section 3417 of the Planning Act.
And we'll come back to that technical motion a bit later. We do have the applicants with us today, Lisa De La Rosa from FOTEN and Jeff Karen and Rod Leahy. Lisa, are you doing the presentation this morning?
I am, and I think I've sent it forward, so if we can get that pulled up, that would be great.
Great, good morning.
Yeah. So good morning, and through you, Chair, I do want to thank Allison and city staff for their work on this file and providing that overview of the request being considered today. I also want to acknowledge Councillor Kavanaugh and our staff that have been fantastic in ensuring that the community comments were brought to our attention as we determine the appropriate way to distribute and permit density at 1071 Ambleside Drive. So I'm Lisa Della Rosa, an associate with FO10 Planning and Design. And with me today here is Jeff Karen and Roderick Lahey, representing the owner and architect for the project. They will assist with answering any of your questions you may have. So Osgood Properties is seeking an approval that will see the redevelopment of the surface parking lot at the rear of their property. Their proposal is for an elegant point tower upon a podium base of townhouses. There were many things that factored into the intensification approach for this property. I'm going to take my time today to highlight two of the main ones: context of the area and built form impacts. Next slide, please. Regarding context, the site is within 300 meters of the new Orchard Lrt Station that is under construction in a well-connected area of the city. The options for active modes of transportation are being enhanced along Richmond Road, and the 15-minute neighborhood is evolving, encouraged by the policies of the new official plan. There is existing high-rise in the area, including the Parkway Tower building on site. This building is 13 stories and is owned, managed, and operated as well by Osgood Properties. There's also high-rise buildings in the neighboring properties, including a 27-story tower at 1081 Ambleside Drive. Next slide, please. This 13-story building will remain, and the redevelopment will take place on the rear of the property, replacing the existing surface parking lot. Underground parking will be introduced on site and will accommodate existing and new tenants, creating the opportunities for better ground level circulation and landscaping. The estimated 312 new units will be housed in a 32-story tower and in ground-oriented townhouses on the podium base. As outlined by Allison, the direction of the project aligns with the planning framework of the city. It is important to note, as she mentioned, that the current floor space index is being respected. This was key in determining the appropriate density for the project. This proposal is not asking to permit more people or building on the site, but requesting to rearrange the density in a less impactful way, as I'm going to explain on the following slides. Next slide, please. The current zoning permits buildings of 39 meters tall, which equates to about 13 stories. Prior to advancing on the narrow tower option, a lot of time was spent looking at what could be done as of right. The same, if not more, density could be achieved sticking to what is permitted today. However, in our opinion, that built form generated more undesirable impacts than that of our proposal. A tower form, while taller, does cast narrower shadows that move more quickly. Variety in skyline is encouraged, and rearranging density is appropriate when resulting built form doesn't increase impacts. Next slide. Any intensification of this property will have impacts. What is being considered today minimizes them. For example, consider the implications on the views if the alternate as of right options from the previous slide were pursued instead of the tower being proposed. Next slide. This property with its surface parking lot along the NCC pathway is ripe for redevelopment. The planning policies support intensification here, and this proposal will result in needed rental accommodation with varying unit sizes, including family-sized townhouses in an area close to transit. The supporting studies confirm that existing infrastructure can accommodate this project. So in conclusion, the redistribution of the permitted density proposed by this official plan and zoning amendment request, as echoed by city staff, is supported by planning policies. The proposal considers the existing context while minimizing the built form impact. Last slide, please. So on behalf of the project team, thank you for your time, and we're happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Lisa, and we will come back to you and your team after our public delegations. So we have 7 delegations registered. First up is Jerry Lapierre, followed by James McEachern and Jane Anderson. So Jerry is first, and I see you there on my screen. Good morning, Jerry.
Good morning, Councillor. Hello, my name is Jerry Lapierre. I'm president of the board of directors of Ambleside 1, a tower and townhouse complex of 314 units abutting the Osgood property. You will have seen our letters of objection, including a 329 signature petition. I'd like to state that we do understand the city's and province's desire for urban intensification along Richmond Road corridor. Next slide, please. As Osgood's photograph shows, the New Orchard, Ambleside, McEwen neighborhood is mature and densely populated. The tall gray building in the foreground represents the proposed 32-story tower. It does not show the 15 townhouses to be built in the green space east of the tower. Next slide, please. This table shows the current demographics of our neighborhood. Please note the already very high density of over 10,000 people per square kilometer versus 365 for Ottawa as a whole. Next slide, please. This graphic from the Cleary New Orchard area specific policy shows the proposed tower, the red square, inside the area designated not appropriate for on-site density redistribution. The city's area-specific policies exist for good reason, and any new development should comply with them, especially in an area already densely populated. Next slide, please. The policy states the New Orchard LRT station is a neighborhood station in an established neighborhood, not a major station or hub. Redevelopment of properties along Richmond Road closest to the station is set at buildings between 14 and 20 stories. If buildings closest to New Orchard Station are designated at 14 to 20 stories only, how can a 32-story tower set back in a mature neighborhood be considered? Next slide, please. The policy also states redevelopment of properties abutting NCC lands must consider a 2 to 4 story building height framing the NCC corridor, which could form part of the base of a larger development. Osgood's drawings show a 32-story tower rising from grade on the NCC property line. No other high rises between Westboro and McEwen Avenue abut this closely to the NCC property line. Next slide, please. The red rectangle show Osgood's proposed 312 units in a 32-story tower and 15 townhouses. The blue rectangle show Fengate's proposed 1,300 units in 3 towers at the corner of New Orchard and Richmond Road. The purple rectangle shows New Orchard Investments proposed 84 units in a high-rise at the north end of New Orchard along the NCC property line. Taken together, these developments will add more than 1,700 units to our already densely populated neighborhood. New Orchard is a short 200-meter stretch from Richmond Road to the NCC property line. The red, blue, and purple lines show that all 3 developments will use New Orchard for resident, visitor, and service vehicles. Osgood's 2022 Transportation Impact Assessment concludes that traffic along New Orchard and Ambleside will exceed the ideal threshold of 120 vehicles per hour for a local road, with up to 288 and 201 vehicles per hour respectively. The green lines show that New Orchard can only queue 4 to 5 vehicles southbound before backing into the New Orchard Ambleside intersection. Overall, we believe the 3 proposed developments that intend to use New Orchard cannot be considered in isolation. We believe they will have a negative cumulative impact on the neighborhood, despite what is suggested in your report. Next slide, please. Your report also argues that new taller buildings may be considered for sites that front on arterial roads. Neither New Orchard nor Ambleside are arterial roads. They are designated local roads. New Orchard is a 1-block dead-end street. Next slide, please. City planners, in their wisdom, undertook to protect our mature neighborhood by creating the Cleary and New Orchard area specific policy in 2018 to ensure that a development such as now proposed was never allowed to happen. Despite the 200 comments registered against the original proposal, the vast majority in opposition, Osgood Properties amended their proposal and increased the tower's height by 2 stories and added 15 townhouses to the property. How does any of this fit with the Cleary New Orchard area specific policy? Only by respecting the provisions of the policy, official plan, zoning, with no exceptions and no amendments, will we be able to increase density wisely and safely in this already densely populated neighborhood. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Jerry. And you're right on time with your 5 minutes. So thank you for that. Are there any questions for Mr. Lapierre? Councillor Kavanaugh.
Thank you very much, Jerry, for taking the time and for such a thorough presentation. I really appreciate it. My question to you is, is there anything that would be acceptable to Ambleside 1 in terms of the development there? You talk about the fact that you have concerns about this, but given that they're allowed to develop on this property, what would be considered to be acceptable?
Anything that fits inside the current zoning and the current area specific policy is acceptable.
Okay, so 20 stories, because that's what the secondary plan calls for.
Yeah, it's 20 stories along Richmond Road. I believe it's 14 or less in this area, also set back from NCC with 2 to 4 stories. Nothing along the NCC property line with that height would be acceptable.
Well, I'll check with staff on that, but so that's what you would consider acceptable.
Something within the current policies and zoning would be acceptable.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Leeper.
Thank you. And Jerry, thank you very much for a thoughtful presentation this morning. I want to touch back on something that Councillor Kavanaugh touched on, which is, what is acceptable? And this is a discussion that we have a lot at this committee, where you could fit the same number of people into a building that will be just the same impact on the views of residents today, but it would be more impactful with respect to things like shadowing, for example. The adjoining properties would be in shadow for a greater part of the day if they were to build a bar or slab building compared to this. Why are you insisting on sticking to the zoning, which allows the same number of people, the same number of cars, but is going to be more impactful to neighbors and be an uglier building at the end of the day, as opposed to redistribution of the density?
Okay, and I understand the question, but it's not quite what we're saying. So what they're saying is as of right isn't accurate. So their as of right is on the NCC property line. That's not as per policy. As per the secondary policy, they're supposed to have 2 to 4 stories as a step up to that tower. So that tower, to be as of right, or any buildings as of right, should be set back from NCC property. Similar to the other buildings like ours and the ones along Ambleside, there are townhouses set along the NCC property line, 6 meters back from the property line. Then back from those townhouses then becomes the tower. And that's where they can put their tower, not where they're asking to put it.
What meaningful impact would that have on adjoining neighbors?
Well, you'd have to ask the planners. That the people that created the Cleary New Orchard policy asked for that setback. Back 50 years ago, when the Ambleside was developed, that was the setback from NCC property. Nobody has a tower built on the NCC property line. Everything is set back. So if they want to set back, similar to what the other buildings of Ambleside are set back, and do that built within the current policies, that's fine. What they're asking for, even their as of right, aren't right. They're as of wrong. They don't fit the policy. That's just their presentation. Doesn't mean it's correct.
And so what I'm trying to get a grip on is by adhering more closely to your interpretation of what the zoning says, what would the benefit of that be for adjoining neighbors?
Well, again, you'll have to ask the planners that created this policy.
Okay. Yeah, and I will be asking the planners to describe what could be built as of right, and whether or not there's any meaningful difference in impacts to the adjoining neighbors. Because if there's no question of reducing density, if there's no question of reducing the number of cars, my own preference would be to have a narrower, slimmer tower than a bar building. And we see the impact of bar buildings all built in the 1970s all over the city, 1980s. They have a significantly more harmful impact on the adjoining neighbors in terms of the shadow impacts, as well as the public realm experience of them, or the pedestrian experience of them. So that's something I'll want to explore with the planners. And then I guess the other very legitimate point you've raised is the question of the setback with a 2-story podium adjoining the NCC property. And I'll just wonder with planners, I'll ask them whether or not that's been adhered to here. Okay.
Councillor Leeper, can I speak to your comment on density?
Yeah, please.
I believe you may have said that the density wasn't an issue, but if you recall in my presentation, the density was one of our biggest issues, in that Osgood's own transportation impact assessment had the vehicles almost doubling what the approved road density is for our area. So density is a huge concern for us.
No, and I don't mean to underplay the concern that you have about density. What I'm wondering is the density significantly less in an as of right form than in what is being proposed here? Because the quality of life impacts of density may be the same whether they rearrange it into a taller tower or whether they keep it in something more like a slab or a bar building. But I do understand the concerns around density. But they're allowed to have the density that they're allowed to have, right?
Correct.
We've got a secondary plan that speaks to those. So
yes, you do, and they are in an area that's not available for density redistribution under the Cleary New Orchard policy.
Yeah, I'll be asking planners about that as well, as to what the intent was there, because strict adherence to the density redistribution prohibition may result in something being built that has the same density, but in an uglier and more impactful built form.
Well, that's a question for the planners. That policy is only 4 years old, so I'm not, I don't see how they could have made that much of an error that was approved by everybody with all the study and money spent on that policy.
Yeah. No, I think we're going in circles at this point, so
yes, we are.
I'll thank the chair.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Brockington.
Thanks, Chair, and thank you, sir, for your presentation this morning. 2 quick questions. Do you know the distance of the proposed development and the new Orchard LRT station?
I can give you our guesstimate from our measurements. They state in their presentation that the property is only 150 meters from the station, which is true. It's a huge property. The actual building is going to be closer to 400 or 500 meters from the station, because the new construction is tucked in the back corner.
Thank you. The other question I noted from your presentation, and Councillor Leeper touched upon this, and maybe I raise it with the planner, but in your presentation, you showed a map of the area coded in purple, and you identified it. It was city document non-densification designation. Again, I could follow up with the planner, but it's your understanding that that shaded area that you illustrated is exempt from this type of development? Is that your understanding?
That's my interpretation of the Cleary New Orchard area specific policy. That is correct.
Okay, thanks. I will follow up with staff, but thank you for your presentation today.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm seeing no more questions. Thanks very much, Jerry, for your presentation and answering questions from the committee. Our second speaker today is James McEachern. Are you with us today, James? You may have to accept the prompt to unmute yourself.
Yes, we're here.
Aha, yes. Good morning.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair and councillors. I just had a few points I wanted to make. On I understand there's a housing shortage, and that with the new LRT, council will want to have more dense housing closer to LRT lines. That's understandable. And with the housing shortage, it's understandable that the council would want to do what they could to help with the housing shortage, to help alleviate it. That's understandable, particularly the shortage of affordable housing. But this proposal before you today from Osgood does not assist with that alleviation of the shortage of affordable housing. I wanted to, and it moreover, it doesn't only fail to comply with the existing policy, but in my view, and I'm basing this on the document that came from the Planning Committee, and I'm on page 12 of that, there is, in the second paragraph, in order to make the amendment to the plan, it appears, and they're now referring to, the second paragraph reads, with respect to general urban area designation, policy 3.6.1.4 states that new taller buildings may be considered for sites that front an arterial road. New Orchard Street is a 1 block long dead end street that cannot, by anybody's standards, be considered an arterial road. And that's where the parking lot empties into. New Orchard, Ambleside Drive is a 1 block long. It's a long 1 block. It begins at New Orchard and Richmond Road, and it goes into Ambleside, and it ends at Ambleside and Richmond Road. It's a loop that runs from Richmond Road at McEwen to Richmond Road at New Orchard. That is not an arterial road. Neither of these streets are arterial roads. And in my view, this matter that's before you today doesn't meet the legal requirements that are set out according to the documents that the city has provided publicly and sent to me. It doesn't meet the requirements in the general urban area designation policy 3.6.1.4. And therefore it shouldn't proceed. In the document itself, it says that the proposals of this nature must respect the character of the community. You can see from the documents, from the photographs that were put up on the screen here this morning, presented by the city itself, how out of character a 32-story glass tower squatting on the NCC parkway, how much out of character it is with every other building, which are shorter and wider concrete and brick buildings. This is out of character. They also say it's going to assist with livability and being cyclist friendly. How can that possibly be? How can it be safer for cyclists and pedestrians when you double the size of the neighborhood? This will double the traffic on New Orchard, of all of the housing that enters on New Orchard. This is more than everything that's there combined. It doesn't do any of that. They have a traffic study. It cites a traffic study in this document prepared by the city planners. But what the study they cite, that is the planner's site, is from the developer's own consultant. There was no independent assessment. There's not even an assessment of the planner's report, of the consultant's report.
James, you're at You're at time here. That's the 5 minutes. However, there may be some questions from the committee. Any questions from councillors? Councillor Kavanaugh.
Thank you very much, Mr. McEachran, for coming out today. I appreciate it. Taking this time. I know this is a big concern for you. You're talking about traffic. You seem to be focused on that. I guess one of the concerns was the parking ratio is fairly high. Is this a concern to you? Is that what you're getting at? I know you're concerned about where it is and that it's not an arterial road. And I'll be asking staff about that. But is that a concern that just about everybody gets parking spot?
Well, the parking spots indicate the number of cars that are expected, and that is the traffic. I had another even bigger concern about this, and it had to do with the housing affordability, but I didn't get to that. I wanted to address what can happen. I wanted to address what I think is the biggest danger of this proposal, and it is simply this. They're proposing to build a 32-story rental tower with 312 units, but there's already a rental building. It's from the 1950s. It provides affordable housing for, I think, 252 renters. There's nothing to prevent the developer from going forward, from building this tower and then tearing down the other tower, the one that's there providing the affordable tower, and building 2 new towers, either of rentals or even of condominiums. Once you approve the 32-story tower that's being proposed, there's nothing to prevent the developer from tearing down a housing that is affordable today and replacing it with housing that's not affordable. So instead of getting more affordable housing under this proposal, you're going to get less affordable housing. When Mr. Greenberg himself was asked at Councillor Kavanaugh's information meeting about the rents that were going to be charged on this tower, he refused to tell us. And the reason he refused to tell us, I think it's obvious to everyone. It's not going to be affordable. It's not going to be inexpensive. You have a brand new building overlooking the park and overlooking the river. These are going to be premium rents that's not going to be affordable for most people. Unlike the building, the 13-story rental building that's there today, that is affordable. And there's a risk of that, the danger of that being taken down, torn down, and replaced. They'll shoehorn 2 more towers on that property.
Councillor Kavanaugh, did you have any additional questions?
I'll just say that I will pass on your questions on the affordable housing. Absolutely. And I take it you're concerned that this is gateway, that this is going to lead to the property being redeveloped, but we can't, of course, deal with that at this time. But I take it that's your top concern.
It is. It's the risk that I'm referring to, Councillor Kavanaugh. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Seeing no more questions, so thank you, James, for your presentation. We'll move on to our third speaker, Jane Anderson. Good morning, Jane.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Welcome.
Okay. Thank you for the opportunity to address the Planning Committee. And thank you to Kelly Crozier as well. She's been very helpful. Our condominium on Ambleside Drive was bought years ago because it was in a well-established neighborhood. We bought because of the spectacular views that overlook the Ottawa River and the Gatineau Hills. We bought because the area was well-defined and had a stellar reputation. We felt confident that our investment was sound. We were very surprised when the proposal from Osgood Properties was submitted to the city. Even more surprised to see that Osgood Properties wanted to build a multi-story high-rise apartment building in a parking lot of Parkway Towers. Osgood Properties later changed their proposal, adding 2 more floors, increasing the apartment to 32 stories, along with townhouses in the parking lot. An article in the Ottawa Citizen dated December 14, 21, titled, "Proposal to Intensify Apartment Property Worries Residents Who Enjoy Ottawa River Vista," outlined the concerns of the residents of Parkway Towers. The tenants at Parkway Towers would have no recourse but to accept it or move out. Owners and residents at 1081 Ambleside were very upset and very angry. Kelly, next slide, please. My husband and I fully support the need to increase housing along the new light rail corridor. The proposed development along Richmond Road will add a lot of housing in the area. As well, there are a lot of other areas in the city that are going to benefit from future development. All you have to do is tour the city and you can see new construction everywhere. My question to the planning department, why is it so important to allow a 32-story apartment building in a parking lot in a neighborhood that has been established for years? Is one apartment going to make a difference to the overall housing situation in the city when so many other projects are planned? Can we not continue to live in an established area? Kelly, next slide, please. Without a building being built on top of us. There is no logic why that building needs to be built. In that parking lot in an area that's been established for years, it doesn't belong there. It's at a place and will destroy the quality of life that so many of us have come to enjoy. Simply said, that building does not fit into an established area under any circumstances. One building is not going to make a difference to the city at all, but it will make a huge difference to the residents who bought and live in this established area. Kelly, next slide, please. The agenda for the meeting today recommends that the planning committee have city council change the policy so the building can be approved. According to the agenda, the planning committee appears to have already decided that they will give approval for the parking lot development even before a vote has been taken or you've listened to those opposing the development. Could you not have at least listened to the concerns of the owners and the residents in the area before coming to that conclusion? Why are you asking public consultation when it appears predetermined, as noted in the highlight sentence below? I was under the impression that I could voice my concerns and actually be listened to prior to the planning department making any decision or recommendations. I'm not sure that's the case. It smacks of bias and appears one-sided only. The one side being for the developers, certainly not for the residents who live in the area. The agenda for today's meeting states, the planning committee recommend council, A, approve an amendment to the Cleary and New Orchard site-specific policies in the official plan, volume B, by adding new policy permitting building heights up to 32 stories, specific to the site at 1071 Ambleside, as in detailed document 2A. B, approve an amendment to zoning bylaw 2008-250 for part of 1071 Ambleside Drive to permit a residential development with heights up to 32 stories as detailed in document 3 and 4. I ask you to think about this presentation and the presentations of all the others who do not want this building in the parking lot. I ask you to consider the true need for an apartment building that no one wants in an established area in a parking lot. That apartment building in the parking lot is not needed and, more to the point, not wanted by anybody in this established area. No previous proposals for lower rise housing are acceptable in the parking lot. We don't want any buildings back there. Please think long and hard about your decision and how it will impact the tax-paying owners and residents of this well-established community. Make the right decision and turn the proposal down, because someday it may happen to you. That's it. I'm finished. Thank you.
Thank you, Jane. And just to be clear, that what you're seeing in the report and in the agenda, they're recommendations to the committee from our staff.
I hear
It's our job as committee to read the report, understand staff's position, but also we're listening to residents like yourself who are here presenting, and we're reviewing the correspondence that's been sent to us from people who aren't able to join us. So there is no decision yet, and that's what we're here to decide today. Councillor Kavanagh has a question.
Thank you very much, Jane. I appreciate you taking the time to come out today and show the pictures.
Thank you.
Is your top concern your loss of view? And we will definitely be asking questions on your behalf to staff and the developer.
Well,
what would you like?
My concern is, yes, of course, it's a loss of view, but the real concern is the community. This has been an established community for years and years and years. We live in it. We go back to the NCC property. My other concern is the new orchard. I didn't bring that in, but you've asked, so I'm going to mention it. That new orchard road is not built for this kind of density. They're going to, that 32-story building will come out onto New Orchard, and it's a very short road, and they will either come back onto Ambleside, or they'll go down to Richmond once the light rail is done. It was never built for this density. It just wasn't. My other concern is, and whether we like it or not, there's kids that are come down this road, Ambleside. There's school buses that come down this road. If we've got a lot of traffic and a lot of people coming off of Richmond, New Orchard, Ambleside, McEwen, this is dangerous. I'm sorry, call it a spade. It's dangerous. It's not built for this. And then all of a sudden, here it is. City planners down the road. I hope you don't have to eat my words. That's all I've got to say.
Okay, so you're concerned about safety, what, for pedestrians and cyclists? Is that your concern?
Yeah, the buses, the kids getting off to school. There's buses that go down New Orchard. There's buses that go down McEwen. There's going to be a lot of traffic, and that road is not built for this kind of volume. It's not. Now, the light rail has changed. You can see the volume has come on to Ambleside because we've got a detour now because of light rail, which is fair enough. They got to build light rail. But now it's coming down a short little distance onto New Orchard, turning onto Ambleside, looping back up to McEwen and back out. The cars in there are unbelievable, especially we'll say 8 o'clock, 8:30 in the morning. Yeah, it's unbelievable. And then you're going to stick a 32-story building up there. Yeah, I'm upset because the whole thing is not well planned. It was not thought. And I was very upset when I saw the recommendation from the city. I mean, it smacks. It's anyway, that's what I've said. That's what I've got to say.
Thanks, Jane. And just for the committee members to know, traffic has been diverted onto Ambleside. It's going to be on Ambleside for the next year going westbound. This is to do with stage 2 LRT construction. So therefore, the traffic has been increased because it's the entire volume of Richmond Road going westbound, and it will be like that for another year. I think it's 16 months total. So thank you, Jane.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Kavanaugh, and thank you, Jane, for your presentation today.
Thank you.
Our fourth speaker is Andrea Cox. Then we'll have Kevin Webb up next. So is Andrea with us?
Good morning. Are you able to hear me?
Yes. Good morning, Andrea. Welcome.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and committee, and thank you for the opportunity to speak at this meeting. I'm a retired condo owner living at 1081 Ambleside. I strongly support every point made in Ambleside 1's board presentation this morning by Jerry Lapierre, and would like to share some additional comments as follows. Intensification. I ask that the Planning Committee please respect the fact that our neighborhood is already about 30% more densely populated than the Ottawa average. This neighborhood is already going above and beyond and contributing to the recognized need for intensification in this city. On a personal note, when we were in the market to purchase, the one negative for us when assessing this neighborhood was the number of high-rise buildings. It felt overwhelming from a human scale perspective. The saving grace was Ambleside Park, which is significantly enhanced by the open space and light to the north between Ambleside 1 and Parkway Towers. This proposal will block this open space to the north to the detriment of this saving grace, Ambleside Park. I'd also like to speak to the proposed building design. New development should be compatible with and respect the established physical characteristics of the neighborhood. The proposed development does not. Additionally, by deviating from the established character and proposing a glass and metal tower, I am very concerned about the window glare on the building's western face during sunsets. Currently, during sunsets, we face east on our balconies due to the blinding intensity of the sun to the west. A 32-story glass wall will serve to reflect the glare of the sun and may render our balconies uninhabitable during this time of day. The reflected glare will only be exacerbated by the mirror effect of the ubiquitous window shade lines one sees lowered in most glass residential buildings. I raised this concern in the November 2021 meeting with the developer. Have the visual impacts of reflected light been investigated since this meeting to ensure that adjacent building residents will not be adversely affected? Noise. The site plan for the proposed building has a loading dock on the west side and facing Ambleside 1 and Parkway Towers building. Loading docks are busy, noisy, and unattractive, and the sounds of garbage and recycling trucks lifting and dumping large metal bins multiple times weekly will reverberate and disturb all the residents in the vicinity. Additionally, being a rental building, the resident turnover will be higher. So in addition to the garbage and recycling trucks and delivery vans, there will be more moving vans as well. The loading dock of the Ambleside 1 building is mitigated by a cement wall and faces a windowless west wall of the Parkway Towers. I strongly object to the proposed location of the loading dock, which I suspect is there partly because they wanted to add the townhouses to the east. And anyway, that's my surmise. The proposals target demographic. This project is targeting the luxury rental market. The most recent figures I saw in vacancy rate for luxury rentals was 6.5%. This is not where the housing crisis exists. Furthermore, I sincerely doubt that the demographic that can afford these luxury units will be taking the LRT. Instead, they will be driving their Teslas. Respecting long established amenities of privacy and river views, I believe the proposed obstruction to the long-established amenities of privacy and river views enjoyed by the residents of Ambleside 1 and Parkway Towers is of such magnitude as to cause an unacceptable adverse impact to the point where the intent and purpose of the zoning bylaw is not respected or maintained. Wind analysis. I would like to challenge the last point made in the pedestrian level wind analysis, where it was stated that extreme weather events such as thunderstorms are generally short-lived and infrequent. Basing study results on that presumption is erroneous, as evidenced by our recent Roche event and general and increasing weather instability due to climate change, and leads one to question the quality of this study. To summarize, we need the city's leadership to prevent this area from being turned into a traffic congested, over-intensified vertical sprawl. We need this city's leadership to plan holistically, consider future developments, consider the danger of setting precedents, and ensure that the current livability in neighborhoods is not being sacrificed in the process. We as residents do our due diligence about where to buy in this amazing city. And when we make the decision to buy in a specific location, we depend on our City of Ottawa representatives to ensure that developers do not ride roughshod over our neighborhoods at our expense. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Andrea. Councillor Kavanaugh has a question.
Thank you, Andrea, for taking the time out to come today and share your concerns. You were talking about the loading dock on the building and the positioning of that. So we can ask the developer about that. You're concerned about the noise factor, is that correct?
Yes, yes. I mean, I don't know if you've ever heard garbage bins being pulled in and out daily but it's pretty, it's very noisy and unpleasant. And again, on top of losing a view, I really don't want to be watching and listening to that every day.
Okay, well, we'll ask the developers about that because I can see that would be a concern. And in terms of the affordable housing, that's come up a few times. And I appreciate the fact that is being asked, that this is a community that is asking those questions and is concerned about affordable housing. So we'll raise that as well, as if that's okay.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Andrea.
And I think the other concern I have is the window glare, because I think that could be significant, and I haven't seen any studies on the window glare impact.
Okay, we can ask that as well. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor, and thank you, Andrea, for your presentation today. Our next speaker is Kevin Webb, followed by Sharon Moon and Howard Clark. Ken Webb. Is Ken with us?
Yes, Chair, he might just need to unmute.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, I've unmuted. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Good morning, Ken. Welcome.
Okay. Good morning, Glenn. Thank you. So my name is Ken Webb. Thank you for the opportunity to make a brief statement to the Planning Committee. I fully support the presentation from the Board of Directors of Ambleside 1, where I live as a condo owner with my partner. This is my home. I am angry about the proposed project. I am angry because a for-profit corporation, Osgood Properties, is being allowed, or I realize it's not, they are proposing to take damage, something of value, something currently enjoyed by the many residents of my building, while providing nothing but drastically higher traffic levels, more construction noise, a loss of faith in city government in return. This something is a bit intangible, but especially in these days of so many problems in our world, this something, you can call it space, or call it our view, or call it security, or call it sanctuary, is very important. We are currently enduring heavy LRT construction and rerouted traffic in our Ambleside 1 neighborhood. But we can at least live in the hope that something positive will come out of that, better transit for all of us. I call on the City of Ottawa to uphold its own policies. Osgood properties must be made to comply with the height restrictions and other policies that are part of the existing City of Ottawa plan. I strongly agree with the Ambleside 1 Board's conclusion that the Cleary and New Orchard area specific policy and the city's official plan provide more than enough scope for development in our small apartment neighborhood, and that everyone should have to comply with both. Everyone. I cannot help but feel that if the City of Ottawa allows this project to go ahead, that the city is failing the people who call Ambleside 1 home. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ken, are there any questions from committee members? Councillor Kavanagh. Councillor, I can't hear you. I'm not sure if you're on, doesn't look like you're on mute, but I can't hear you. We have lost your audio, Councillor Kavanagh. Can anyone else hear the councillor, or is it just me? No? Aha, you're connected now, I think, councillor, so try unmuting.
Thank you. Sorry, must have touched a button that took off the audio. Apologies. Did you hear my question? I guess not.
No, we didn't.
Apologies. Yeah, no. I wanted to get at the top concerns, and you mentioned that Ambleside 1 has already presented views similar, but is the top concern about the view? Is it about the traffic? What is the top concern that you have?
Well, it's a combination of all of these different things. Certainly, I'm mentioning what I would consider to be drastically higher traffic levels. And certainly, the view, but it's more this intent. I mean, the overall thing is this intangible of having a home and having so many different things that feel like assaults on, our security. And I'm saying that this is something that's very, very important. And I fully support what everyone else has said about all the very specific things. But I'm trying to talk about the impact that it has that I feel on myself.
What I'm hearing is that it feels like there's something being added, but there's no benefits to the community overall. And we can't talk about that today because this is a zoning application. It's not about site plan. But is that something that we should look at? Is there something that they could make it more, like, for example, just more accessible to the community, this property?
Well, one example of the community was brought up by Jerry LaPierre, the head of the Ambleside 1 board, in mentioning the number of other properties and the overall increase in intensification and traffic and such.
Okay, so all right, in terms of traffic, that's your top concern. If there was lower parking ratios, would that be satisfactory?
What do you mean by a lower parking ratio?
Well, right now, just about everybody will get a parking spot, which means there'll be, cars per unit. Developers have that option to not provide parking so that people must use the transit. This development is not doing that as much as others. Some of them have 50% ratio where it's only 50% get parking spots. Is that what you're saying would be better?
I can't really comment on what I think would be better. I'm not a planner. I don't really know the details. I can just see already with the diverted traffic that we're getting because of the closure on Richmond, increased traffic. It takes longer to cross the street. I know that many of, I'm a senior citizen. Many of the people in this building are much older than I am, and they have difficulty crossing the street. And so already it's obvious that it can be a problem if the number of cars increase in our area.
Okay. All right. Thanks very much, Ken.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor.
Okay. Thank you, Ken, for your presentation today. Our next speakers, they're registered together, Sharon Moon and Howard Clark, and then our final speaker will be Lorna LeMay. So Sharon and Howard are next. Are you with us today?
Yes, we are. Can you hear us?
Yes, we can. Good morning.
Great. Good morning, and thank you for hearing our presentation. We live in 1081, like many of the other people who are presenting, on the 6th floor. When we bought our condominium home, we chose it because of the wonderful view we have of the Ottawa River. You've seen that in some of the presentations, the beautiful view. And also because of the proximity to the NCC parkland beside the river. And even though it's an apartment building, apartment neighborhood, it felt park-like with both the park behind the building and the river and the NCC land along the parkway. We were also aware that the area had been designated, at least in our reading of the Cleary New Orchard secondary plan, as an existing mature neighborhood not suitable for on-site density redistribution. So our concerns are as follows.
Yeah, so in spite of what Alison presented, as Jerry Lapriere said, the New Orchard, Cleary New Orchard secondary plan states, the city's planning vision acknowledges Ambleside as a neighborhood where intensification is not suitable. The current neighborhood is already very dense. The plan clearly identifies the entirety of the residential Ambleside neighborhood as not suitable for on-site density redistribution. And so we believe this proposal goes completely against this secondary plan. A 32-story tower does not appear to be permitted in even the denser portions of the city's plan for the immediate area of the New Orchard LRT station, even on Richmond Road. In our view, the proposed development does not meet the city's policy to integrate the existing tower within the proposed redevelopment and complement the adjacent urban fabric with insufficient separation of the proposed tower from existing buildings. In addition, the increased traffic that would be created by such a tall tower is questionable, as you've already heard, for designated green streets like New Orchard and Ambleside. The Cleary and New Orchard secondary plan states all development and redevelopment will be designed with a human scale, which this tower clearly is not. And the staff report says, under planning rationale, with respect to the general urban designation policy 3614, states that new taller buildings may be considered for sites that front an arterial road. None of those things apply to this site because it does not front an arterial road.
The Cleary New Orchard plan also states the scale and character of existing neighborhoods will be preserved through appropriate height transitions of new development. Again, this proposal does not do that. It's difficult to see how this very tall, straight, modern structure will blend into the character of this neighborhood. The external design of the proposal for 100 New Orchard, while obviously a more contemporary design, fits much more with the character of the neighborhood. The visual impact of this 32-story tower blocking direct views from two adjacent buildings does not blend with the character of our neighborhood. In our case, it interferes with our privacy, as the building would overlook both of our balconies on the east and north side. And we're concerned that the value of our home will be significantly reduced because of this. The concept perspectives by Osgood Properties do not provide a realistic representation of the impact of the tower on existing buildings.
Approving this would also be a precedent for this neighborhood. The 32-story tower would start, I think, others begin to apply for similar height variances. In addition, its proximity to the NCC parkland is a concern. It's totally incongruent to have this tall building right against the fence of the NCC parkland. In addition, mainly 1 and 2 bedroom rental units are included in the proposed development. Although they mention the townhouses are family, some of the townhouses are family sized, the most of the development will attract a more transient population rather than adding to the stable neighborhood with the diversity of people at different stages of life. And as was already been said, there is no mention of affordable housing either, which needs to be a priority for our city. The availability of larger units would encourage families in the neighborhood. And so we are not in favor of the development principally because of the density, I think. And that ends our presentation.
There we go. Now I've unmuted. Thank you for your presentation. Councillor Menard has a question.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thanks for the presentation. I wanted to key in on a couple of aspects you mentioned, because the first thing you mentioned was the view. And so if the proposal stuck to what the current zoning calls for, which I believe is 39 meter building, more of a bar building, would that not obstruct your view in that case? Or you said you're on the 6th floor, I think.
Yeah.
And so my understanding is a lot more views would be obstructed by that 39 meter bar building.
Correct. That's correct.
That's correct. We don't like the idea, though, of it overlooking our balconies.
Either way.
And both balconies we lose our privacy completely.
And we believe the bar building would also be a lot closer to our building.
Right. So, and I guess I'm trying to reconcile the proposal in front of us, what the secondary plan calls for now, and your concerns. I guess, you started with the views, and then the last thing you mentioned was density. I understand that the proposal would keep the FSI where it is, but that the secondary plan shows this area as not allowing for a redistribution of density, which would be, I guess, your concern in that in that regard with height. And so I understand on that concern where the secondary plan is. But the other piece I just wanted to mention is around the parking. You mentioned traffic. And so are you in favor of lowering the parking requirements for this proposal?
Absolutely.
I would think if this proposal goes ahead, then yes, a lowering of the parking requirements would be more favorable. I'm not sure how, can you explain to me how when the Clear in New Orchard secondary plans clearly identifies it as not suitable for on-site density redistribution, and then you talk about the FSI, is that that they're not inconsistent, I guess, is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I guess what they're saying is the density would remain the same, but that they're redistributing it. And that's the question I have too. The secondary plan clearly says not to do that in this area. But I think there's some potential positive benefit is what the report is saying with doing that in terms of views and overall interaction with the site. So I take it you take issue with that and appreciate that perspective. But I'm just trying to key in on a few of the issues that you had raised that to me sounds like there's always room for negotiation to tweak these projects to be a bit better. And the parking is certainly one that I can see. It seems like a lot. I'm going to ask the staff about that. And the view issue, though, I think would be affected regardless of than what is currently being proposed now. So I think you've acknowledged that, though I might have been breaking up a little bit there when I first asked that question. So, Chair, I think that's it for me on this one. Thanks.
I think regardless of whether it's a 15 or a 25 or a 35-story tower, it's going to affect the view for everybody in these two buildings.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Menard.
I think also you do need to consider Jerry Lapierre's point about other buildings that are already being proposed for along Richmond Road, which is a much better place. Richmond Road is ripe for high-rise, not maybe 30-story buildings, but that's a perfect place for working for new construction. But I don't think this
Okay.
is.
We have another question from Councillor Kavanaugh.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you very much, Sharon, for coming out today. You talked about the separation from other buildings, and we'll talk to staff about that because, of course, that is taken into consideration. But you were concerned about your privacy, and we'll ask about that as well, of what can mitigate it. Are you suggesting that you just can't have a building? That's the only way you can protect your privacy?
We'd love to say yes.
Okay. And in terms of the scale and character of the neighborhood is basically buildings that were built probably 50 years ago, easily.
Yeah.
And you're suggesting that they should look like those buildings, that they should look like brick buildings?
Well, the comment was made in our presentation about 100 McEwen, which is more of a
Not McEwen,
New Orchard, sorry, which is a modern building, but it's not a tall cigar tower like this is going to be.
Okay, and you, among others, raised the issue of affordability.
Yes.
Appreciate that is a concern for you. So we'll definitely raise that. In terms of density, why is it that you're concerned about? Is it related to traffic, or is it related to the fact that I was wondering if the issue of the fact that there's it's almost like a food desert there, that there's no retail that is close by that is walkable. I mean, the grocery stores are over 1 kilometer away. It's certainly
not a 5-minute walk neighborhood in this particular time. It's yes, you're absolutely right. People are going to be needing cars to get to grocery stores, and it's really a concern to have that many more cars. We're already experiencing so many cars coming through because of the diversion of Richmond Road, and it's you can't almost get out of our parking lot sometimes. Just have to wait and wait and wait.
Okay, but I appreciate the questions from Councillor Menard about parking. So you think that parking should be lowered, the ratio should be lowered, because you're worried about traffic, and of course this is transit-oriented development, so so that's something to discuss. So I appreciate your comments on that.
Well, as Jerry little map showed, with this development and the other two proposed on either side of New Orchard, there would be then three large developments discharging traffic onto New Orchard.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Leeper.
Thanks. I just wanted to make sure I understood one of the last points that you made. It sounded like you were asserting that because renters are more transient, that they don't make as valuable a contribution to neighborhoods. Did I understand that point correctly?
It wasn't so much that as the 1 and 2 bedrooms are less likely to be family oriented as well. And so like we're fairly intergenerational in the existing buildings. I guess our thinking, may be wrong, is that it's going to be mostly transient younger people in that building, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I'm seeing no additional questions. So thank you, Sharon and Howard, for your presentation. Our next speaker, our final speaker, is Lorna Lemay.
Morning, can you hear me?
Good morning, Lorna. Yes, we can. Welcome.
All right, good morning, Mr. Chair, Planning Committee, and I appreciate this opportunity to address this topic this morning. First of all, I want to say that I strongly support all the points that have been raised this morning via your guest speakers. And appreciate the pictures, the video, the images that Jerry Lapierre had shown on the screen. I had several points, all of which have been made, so I'm not going to repeat them. I'm simply going to emphasize them. And I have one that is new that I have not heard raised as of yet in this forum. So quickly, my first point is that the city made a commitment to pay attention to the impact that the design has on the community in which they're located. And what you've heard this morning is a lot of people talk about the impact, various different impacts. And what I'm hearing in terms of the questions is, what would satisfy you? What could we negotiate? Could we reduce the parking spaces and you'll be happy? I think you need to take this in its entirety, in its full context. There's not one thing. If you reduce the number of parking spaces, that may respond to the concern about some traffic, but there are many concerns that are equally, have equal weight that are being presented. So I guess what I'm saying is, please don't ask me what's my major concern. What's the one thing you could do that would have me say, oh, thank you very much, we're okay with this. There really isn't one. So I would say, other than the provision for high-rise buildings in terms of how it may significantly impact public view corridors, by looking at landmarks, by looking at areas that should be protected. And when I was doing my research on this, of course, I came across the Ontario Heritage Act, Part 5, I've heard that mentioned this morning, and that the city may require. So let's admit that the NCC corridor, the NCC property, the parkway is heritage property. It is protected. The city may require that an impact statement be conducted. Why have you not done that? This construct will abut on that property. And I'm not just talking about once it's built. How about while it's being built? And there's whatever happens to dig down and really do that work for the underground parking. So what happens? Can you insist on? Can we implore you to insist on that type of assessment? What's that going to do to the wildlife? I walk in that park, along that parkway every day. The birds, the animals, the beauty of it. What's that going to do? This abuts that parkland. And also I noticed that on page 33 of the report, there's a note there, there's no suitable parkland on the subject site. There's no suitable parkland. So the builder will have to pay cash in lieu of parkland. What is that? What does that look like? What is this builder paying that they're taking away from us and perhaps that heritage site? What is that cash in lieu? I want to know a little more about that. The other piece for me is those impact assessment, the traffic impact assessment. You heard a lot about that. They are not independently done. They are done by the builder. They have a vested financial interest in this. How can you accept that? When you hear 200 remarks of something's not right here, does that not spur you on to do your due diligence? A call for due diligence, independent assessments for traffic. You've heard a lot of that. I want to bring up the wind assessment, the wind impact assessment. I've been doing a lot of research on this canyon effect. I note that there's going to be 4 additional constructs in this area. 236-story, kitty corner to Ambleside, one across the street from Ambleside 1, and another one on New Orchard. This must be taken in the context. It's not, oh, well, we didn't know those other things were going to have an impact. This has to be analyzed in that context. The wind impact assessment and the canyon effect. There is already a canyon effect in front of Ambleside 1 where I live. We all know in this building, do not drop your elderly grandmother or try to pick her up in front of this building. She's going to get blown over the edge of the parking lot. The wind factor is high. Many people have stopped there, opened their car door, and it gets smashed into the cement posts. There is already a wind tunnel effect there. What's going to happen with these other buildings, particularly a very large one that is definitely going to redirect the wind? It's already very windy there. So I absolutely implore you to do your due diligence and conduct independent assessments of the traffic and of the wind, particularly this canyon effect. That canyon can affect the negative consequences include wind, temperature, light, and the directional patterns, as well as air quality. We're now talking an increase in traffic. What's that going to do to the air quality? That's going to pull all of that air, and we're going to be breathing more carbon monoxide.
Lorna, thank you. Thank you for your comments. You're at your 5-minute time, but Councillor Kavanagh has a question for you.
Thank you very much, Lorna. I appreciate you coming out today and passing on your concerns. You're the first one talking about, the cash in lieu, which is, it's now called community benefit that could be applied. So this is, in this case, this is, they're taking an asphalt parking lot and they're putting in a building on their private property, but in terms of parkland, we can certainly look at that, and I can ask the city staff about what the possibilities are for this application. Is that what you're asking?
Is one part of what I'm asking. There are 3 pieces to my ask.
Okay. Well, we can certainly certainly pass on the concerns. We'll be asking questions directly to developer and city staff on your behalf.
Traffic impact assessment, independent, wind impact assessment, and to look at that NCC property and that cash in lieu, whatever you call it. Thank you.
Yeah, community bank. Yeah, I'll ask about the consultation with the NCC, which I do believe happened, but I think it needs more detail so that people can hear what was said. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Kavanagh. Thank you, Lorna, for joining us today. So that's the end of our public delegations. We'll go back now to the applicants, and this is an opportunity for committee members to ask questions to the applicants. We have Lisa De La Rosa from FOTEN, and we have Jeff Curran and Rod Leahy, who are also here as part of the team. So any committee members or councillors wish to go ahead? Councillor Kavanagh, you have the first hand up, so the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and thank you again to all the residents who came out today and expressed their concerns. Yes. Anyway, you got to hear the concerns again, and then of course we did have a full meeting back the end of last year to make sure that residents could get their questions answered then. And I know that there was changes to the plan. You heard a lot of concern about traffic, and of course people are getting a taste of traffic right now because of the coincidence of the Ambleside being used as a diversion route, detour route, because of the stage 2 construction. I just wanted to get any comments about possibility of reducing parking so that this is truly a transit-oriented development, so that we have less cars going on that road.
Yeah, through you, Chair, I'm happy to answer that. So Yes, the parking ratio we're actually looking at, and this includes the existing building, so accommodating the parking spaces that people currently have in the existing building. We're looking at 0.8. So the ratio for the new building is actually less than that. It just averages out to 0.8 overall. The other thing that's being done is we are looking at TDM measures to encourage people to not use their car. The bike parking is 1-to-1, and bike parking is also being accommodated for the existing residents who at current don't have a very good facility there. The bike parking will be enclosed, underground, secured, so it does make it a lot better than just attaching your bike to an outside structure. With regards to the traffic on New Orchard, it's an existing condition. Like regardless of doing nothing, that the car stacking and all of that is happening. So, and unfortunately, we are sympathetic, but this is not, yes, it might aggravate the issue, but at the end of the day, that might discourage people from actually using their car if, it's going to take them forever to get on the road when they can walk. And it's approximately, I would say, about 300 meters walk. There are improvements being done about the circulation on site. The current pathways that are there now will be re-looked at, redone as part of the site plan process to make sure that it is a convenient way to get to parking. There's also information packages and on OC Transpo and options that the tenants have that are different from cars that are provided at move-in to encourage alternative modes of transportation. And then we are currently looking at car share options. There is some surface parking spaces that will remain. So car sharing to allow for people who have that, one trip to Costco that doesn't, won't work on a bike or on transit. So there's that option. And then they unbundle their parking. So not every unit gets a parking space. Rent is separate. So people will have to make the choice to rent an additional parking space. So there's another cost there that if there's better alternatives, they might choose not to. So with that, I'm not sure if anything else Jeff or Rod wants to say. The parking ratio is less than 0.1 right now. And I'll leave it at that at this point.
You heard concerns that they questioned the traffic study. So I don't know if it's possible, but I'll ask City if they can do one as well. I know it's typical for the planner to do one, but I'll ask if City can do one as well, since there are concerns on the not just the impact of yours, but the buildup of all these developments in the area that are being planned and proposed. But I do want to ask you about affordable housing. That came up a number of times, and I really appreciate that the neighbors are concerned and want to see people have affordable housing. And that was raised at the meeting, but we didn't really get an answer on that about how affordable these units are. This is a concern, and I appreciate that they raised it over and over again.
So I'll let Jeff finish this, but I can start it by essentially saying we're talking about a building that's probably going to be occupied, let's say 4 years from now, if everything sort of goes smoothly with construction and stuff. So to have a conversation about what rents will be and what is affordable or attainable and the unit mix and such is sort of a little premature. There is an undertone on the whole development industry for affordable units, and the city is working on policies. So at the end of the day, when we're at the point of finalizing this building, there could be new policies. There could be things that require us to do certain things, and our different measures or different scales of how the city is defining what is affordable, who can provide that affordable housing. So it's not something we're not doing. It's just something that we're not at a point where we can actually have that conversation.
Are you willing to get into conversations with the city about making units affordable by the definition of CMHC?
Jeff, I don't know if you want to take that one.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for that question. Counselor, I mean, I think there's two elements to that. One is absolutely we're considering affordable in the new building. It's something that we're looking at very closely, and as the more and more market studies as we progress through the design process, we'll have a bit more visibility on what we can and can't do. I think it's also worth noting that the vast majority of Osgood's portfolio is affordable by definition of CMHC standards, and so by adding a new building, we provide choice in the market, and we have a huge portfolio of affordable housing already in the city.
If I have time, I'd like to ask a couple more questions. One is was raised about window glare and glazing, and while I'm at it, I'll ask about bird-friendly windows. So those two topics, window related. There was concern about the glare from a shiny building, I guess, and are you looking at bird-friendly windows?
I can speak to that. We are follow the City of Ottawa guidelines with respect to bird-friendly glazing. And as the design development sort of keeps going and we start doing more intensified energy modeling and looking at glazing, amounts of glazing, I think there'll be less concern that was brought up about the reflective niches. These are not mirrored glazing. So we do not have any mirrored glass on the building at all. So.
Thank you. What kind of consultations took place with the NCC? This was raised a number of times about the concern of the adjacent property with the NCC, which is, our green space. It's very valuable to the community. And so what conversations took place, and what did you hear?
So through you, Chair, we did, the city does circulate the NCC, and comments were received through the comment process, and some changes were actually made because of those. One of the community members did raise the fact that there's a 4-story profile or a smaller, more pedestrian scale, and the introduction of those townhouses at the ground level. There is a slight podium base to provide that sort of lower profile base to the building. There's more doors on that side. It does interact. The one thing that the NCC did sort of not adamantly say, but the connection, we at one point had a connection that would potentially lead out directly to the pathway from this building, and there was no appetite to entertain that. And the idea would be to funnel through to New Orchard and up through the established pathway systems already. Landscaping, fencing, all of those sorts of details are more what the NCC was concerned with. And as we go to the site plan process, we can imagine them being a bit more involved at this point than they are at the zoning stage.
I'll ask one more question. I'll let my colleagues, and I'll go back on the list after, but mentioned about loading dock. I'm just going to throw that one out because there was concern about the noise, et cetera, and the location. And obviously that would be, something that's perpetual if it's not done right.
Yes, a fair bit of study has been looked into this, and it's something I don't want to sound evasive. As we move forward, we'll begin looking at different options. I know from a management point of view and how the building functions, a lot of study went into it, and this seemed to work the best. We have a lot of traffic in terms of deliveries. You imagine the world has changed so much with the advent of the delivery of the electronic shopping right now. So we have to make sure the building functions, that you get quick in and out. And so in the whole design process, we did some interesting work in that. We actually, the current building right now actually shares a right-of-way over 1081. We actually go onto their property and then move back down onto 1071. That's now been discontinued, and we can actually disconnect to 1081, actually add more green space along that. And the whole sort of servicing of the building has been simplified. But again, through the site plan process, these items will come up for discussion with planning staff, and again with the through the site plan process. So we're happy to keep looking at those items.
So can I ask if you've taken the consideration of noise for the adjacent residents to neighbors?
Well, again, one of the things we did was stop driving on their property, which is giving them some control over their own property, and will remove all the cars that went into the basement that were driving across their property. That's now been will be totally removed during this phase, or when the building is completed. So we have looked at sort of benefits of the adjacent property through this design.
It's probably worth noting. Oh, sorry, Councillor, I didn't mean to speak over you, but it's worth noting as well that our residents at 1071 will be equally, if not more, affected by any noise on the site. So noise mitigation at the new proposed building is mutually beneficial for everybody at the property.
Absolutely. It was implied that by building this, you may consider in the future tearing down the current building and replacing it with another taller building. What are your comments on that?
So I'll start with that, and just to there is a height schedule that is being included with this zoning going forward. So where the height is going to be increased is specific to the floor plate we have shown. So the idea of a taller building or something being built in the future, if they were ever to demolish this building, and Jeff will talk to that, that was never considered. It's not a phased project. This building it's good, it's standing, there's no anticipated demolition of this building. And so the heights that we're asking for are very specific to the floor plates we have shown. And anything in addition to what is there currently would have to go through another process, which I don't think that there's appetite for. But Jeff, you can probably expand on that.
No, I agree with everything you said, Lisa. There's no intention of tearing down the existing building. We've owned the building for 25 years and intend to for another 25 plus.
Okay, I'll pass it on to my colleagues and I'll ask to be put back on the list. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Curry.
All right, thank you very much. This has been a really good meeting so far, I think. I like the presentation I received, and I want to go to one of the comments from the community members who made the comment, if you remember, that this original as of right is really as of wrong. And really, I just want to get at the part of that is it actually accurate, the as of right drawing that we were shown, which is sort of like a long block building? Is that actually true to what the as of right says?
Yes, that's true to zoning. So the zoning obviously is what trumps everything. It's the law. And so it basically based on existing heights, existing setbacks, and that's what you're allowed to build when we say that's as a right. It doesn't take into effect sort of necessarily other policies that maybe the city wants to change that direction, but they haven't changed the planning that is in place, the zoning is in place. I think Lisa can speak to this.
Just more clarification though, I think the speaker indicated specifically the setbacks, that they were wrong. Putting a building where it was as to show us what as of right was not actually accurate. No, it is accurate. Yeah. And I believe it's been vetted by the planning department as well.
Yeah, so the zoning setback along there was two options we throwed up. We did a couple of options looking at different as of right sort of development. And so the two I threw up were the ones that I think showed you can do different variations, but the setback that was used against the NCC property was as per current zoning. And to that, just to further what Rod was saying, that's as of right for zoning, we would still have to go through a site plan process. So some of the shapes may change. There might be a little bit more thought put to access and where driveways would be and such like that. But that was just a massing exercise to sort of get to where we got to understanding the redistribution of density. And the key thing there is the density. We're actually with this proposal, we're actually leaving some of the density on the table. We can go to a 3, an FSI of 3, and I believe we're slightly under that. So there could be additional density put on here without affecting that mechanism the city uses to monitor sort of appropriate densities on sites.
Okay, thank you for that. I want to go back to the question Councillor Kavanaugh asked about the affordability. And so I understand markets change. I understand there may be completely different demand 4 years from now. But if it were built right now, what would that affordability number for renting a unit, what would that be right now?
Jeff, I'm sure that you guys have done some performas and stuff looking at rental rates for that new building.
Yeah, so sorry, just to make sure I understand the question correctly, Councillor. So are you asking what the average rent for the unit would be, or what the definite, like the affordable unit would be?
Yeah, like I just want to, if we were talking that there would eventually be affordable, if it were right now, what do we consider affordable?
Well, we've kind of gone by the CMHC's definition of affordable, which is 30% of median household income of $80,000. And I can't remember off the top of my head what that number works out to be, but I think it's around $1,700 a month, if I remember correctly.
Okay, that's helpful. And I have a number of questions for staff, but my last question for you is so the question about the impact study. So there was not an impact study done, but I understand it still could be, and that would be something that the developer would do, not staff. Or do you have a comment on that, the concept of an impact study?
I think it just through you, Chair, just a clarification of that. So we've done a traffic impact study. There's been a wind study done. So I'm not sure when you talk impact, what you're looking at.
It was the presenter that asked for that an impact study overall of having a building there. That this hasn't been done, I think was the comment.
I'm not sure I can answer that without knowing exactly what the impact is that they're looking for as the measure.
Well, I think it was onto NCC property, but you're saying wind has been done, traffic has been done,
and servicing has been done. All of those key studies have been done. Yes.
Okay, maybe her comment was mostly it wasn't independent. It wasn't independent. It was done by someone that has a vested interest. But all right, I have other questions for staff. I'll stop here.
Okay, Councillor Leeper.
Thank you very much. So the key question here is around density, and if the assertion that we've heard from Osgood and from planning staff is correct, this committee is basically going to try to decide whether or not to take the same density that would be allowed by right and put it into a taller, skinnier form. But I do want to challenge or ask you to convince me, I guess. This development has 312 residential units. There's a number of constraints on what can be done here, including current zoning at 13 stories. You've got setbacks, you've got tower separations. Could you really fit 312 units into a 13-story building that would meet the zoning? If you were to do a 13-story build, could you? With the same unit mix?
At the same unit mix. I mean, Jeff, we actually had this discussion on Champagne Street, almost a similar discussion where zoning allowed us to do something, but secondary plan was saying, well, it'd be nice to do a tall, slender building as opposed to a large slab building. And I think in the end, I think you realize you actually can do a slab building, and most developers would be loving to do big slab buildings because they're cheaper and more profitable. So I think this is the right approach to move away from that, and we have moved away from it. You know, generally we're not doing the buildings that they did in the 70s anymore. We would never do what 1071 or 1081 is today. We would not be allowed to do that building under the current high-rise guidelines. So I I think this design is the way all the city guidelines are directing us to develop these sites. And the idea of taking a very large surface parking lot and adding this type of product, I think is a move in the right direction.
So even if you stuck to the zoning with all the policies that go around that with respect to setbacks and tower separation, et cetera, you can still move ahead with 312 residential units with the number of cars that creates, the congestion, et cetera. So all this committee is being asked to do is decide whether or not we want to allow that density to be distributed from a slab building into a significantly taller point tower. I think that's a fair way to put this one.
Yes.
Do you have an idea? Sorry, there were a question tweaked earlier from one of the residents. Do you know how much CIL this is going to create? Do you have that rough idea at this point?
Seeing as that the CIL is Parkland bylaw just changed, but under the transition policies, we have a year to get building permit, and that would be at like a 10% value. So that's what currently is, but we have a process to go through. So it could change, but that we did actually have, it's a good segue, thank you. We did actually propose a small parkland contribution on this site, but through back and forth with staff, it was determined the Ambleside Park is there already, and that the preference would actually be for cash in lieu versus parkland.
Okay, that'll be an interesting question for our planners then, because of course we have the Parkland First policy in place now. But I'll be interested to see why they decided that the CIL contribution would be a better one. But I'm still wondering, like, what is that ballpark figure? Is this $1 million in CIL or 800,000 in CIL?
I'm not sure if Jeff knows the land value currently to be able to do that math. And it would be based on I guess the value of the land wouldn't be changing because we're just redistributing density. So it's hard for, I'm a planner and not a numbers person.
It was just generally at this point in the process, as counselor for the proposals in my ward, I've got a very good idea what the CIL contribution is going to be. So I imagine you must have it, and I'm just interested in hearing what that ballpark figure is.
To be honest, counselor, we don't have it right now, so we can get it to you afterwards.
Okay. And then, sorry, the last question is with respect to the north side facing the parkway, is there a step back after the second floor, or is it going straight up?
There's no setback after the second floor on the north side. That we only have it's essentially it's a two-story building along the entire property, except for that small portion of the tower. So we didn't think the two-story setback that you'd normally have in an urban situation made any sense. You also have a heavily forested area right in front of us as well. So again, all those things sort of made that very important setback sort of meaningless in this situation.
No, I think that's legitimately put. I guess the NCC didn't insist on it in their discussions when they were looking at it. So, because I think that was there for that two-story podium feel is in the secondary plan is largely to satisfy the NCC's concerns around the corridor, as it was put. Okay, I would encourage you to take a look at the CMHC program. I don't think that we should be, I know we don't have leverage over it, but I don't think we should be allowing residential projects to move ahead without taking advantage of that CMHC program in order to get that 20% affordable housing according to their definition. And then I will be interested in hearing further discussion. I think Councillor Menard is certainly on to something with respect to the parking ratio. How many stories down are you going with the parking?
I think good question. I think we're two stories below grade.
Okay, and that's probably the minimum you need to go down anyways in order to pour the building?
It was because we're working with the existing, lining up with the existing basement as well, because we're getting into the existing basement of 1071.
Okay.
And so we've aligned with the existing parking levels of that building.
Okay, but it's somewhere around 2 stories down then.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. I'm taking a look at your bike parking ratio. And I mean, I know a lot of this stuff is site plan, but that's wholly inadequate. This is going to be on some of the best cycling infrastructure in the city. And certainly if we want to reduce the number of cars having that impact on Ambleside, one of the things that could be done is to turn more of that parking garage over to bike parking, particularly secure bike parking, which is really emerging as an issue as we have break-in after break-in at various different private developments. So I would certainly look at that. All right, thanks, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions for the applicant? Okay, thank you, Lisa, Jeff, and Rod for answering questions today. Oh, Councillor Kavanagh, yes, you did want to come back on.
I did. I'm sorry. I thought it was noted, but that's okay. Always looking for the button. One of the concerns that was raised, pardon me, I'm forgetting what I've asked now, was privacy and how to deal with privacy in terms of the concerns that were raised. We've already had the questions answered about the distance between buildings, but what can you do to enhance privacy for residents of the other buildings?
That's a good question. One of the things we've done is by again with the taller footprint, sorry, the taller building, smaller footprint. We've orientated, I think 90% of the units are really geared toward water views, which obviously to take advantage, I think we only have 1 unit on the floor plan that looks back toward the buildings. So I think as we move the design development forward, we can look at screening of those, possible screening of the balconies. So that type of element could be looked at. I don't, because we haven't really gone into design development yet, but basically the orientation and sort of the view plane of this building is really more east, west, and north as opposed to south back to the existing building. So most of the windows on the south side, except for that 1 unit, are going to be we call secondary windows or tertiary windows. That would be your bedroom or bathroom windows, where the primary windows are looking to say east, west, or north. So I think that will help a lot. So
and with that, I just wanted to highlight that the closest distance is to the existing Ambleside towers on the Osgood property. The separation distance of this tower to 1081 is well beyond the 23 meters that is required in what we're providing on the site.
Thank you. It's too bad that somebody from Parkway Towers didn't come out today. I would think that would be interesting to hear from them, since I think they're more impacted than anyone. I appreciate the questions from my colleagues on community benefit. I'm obviously very interested in that in terms of just the overall community, because of the impact of such development is obviously, since we've heard from the people here, has an impact. One of the concerns that has been raised and is with the density. It's kind of ironic that we're putting in more density, and yet our official plan talks about a walkable neighborhood, and yet there's no commercial in this area. Have you considered commercial in your building, for example, a coffee shop or something like that, so people have a destination, something walkable nearby, maybe a pharmacy or something on the main floor?
We're not asking to change the permitted uses, and uses do allow for, in this zone, we are permitted to do those sorts of things on the ground floor. And so it's not off the table.
Okay, can this be considered? Because that would make it more a benefit to the community if there's something that they could go to, considering the number of people, since we already know the density is pretty high.
I definitely think it could be considered. I would be, I personally, as the architect, I'd love to add something like this. I'm speaking for the developer here, but it'd be, I think it would add to the livability of the whole, of both the existing building, the new building, and the neighborhood. So I think if it can be programmed in, a lot of times you'll see where these projects don't make a lot of sense from a rental point of view. The landlord actually owns the little coffee shop and manages it, just as incentive to make the area a little bit more interesting, because they are tough from an economic point of view to make sense. But anyways, it's something I'm sure Jeff has already been looking at in terms of the future of the project. So.
I have raised it before, and I think that sort of takes away the silo feeling of the neighborhood, so that you can go to it and it's someplace that where people can interact. So I appreciate that, and hopefully a community benefit would also be something for the community. All right, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. And thank you again, Lisa, Rod, and Jeff. We will switch gears and go to questions for staff, of which there are a few we've been warned about. So Councillor Curry, you're up first.
I just wanted to ask a question about the secondary plan, that it's only 4 years old. And believe me, I understand what Councillor Leeper is saying. I understood this in the briefing, that the as of right is a building that would be more problematic, and they're just saying, we'll make it all better by making it a tall tower. However, at the same time, the secondary plan is, at my understanding, it's only 4 years old, and that this would be a change to it. It makes me wonder about how good our secondary plans are, or how valuable they
are. Thank you, Chair. Yes, the secondary plan was adopted in 2018. I mean, I think about 2 or 3 years of work went into it. There was a lot of consultation done, and there was a lot of concern raised by the residents in the area as they saw transit was coming towards them about the kind of change that might bring. Since then, we've gone through our growth management work for the new official plan. We've had lengthy discussions about how to manage growth, how to manage sprawl versus intensification, and what would be the appropriate balance of that. And the council has approved the new official plan. The new official plan is calling for higher targets for intensification now than there were in place in 2018. Any developer has the right to make a site-specific application, and that's what's happened here. And I heard the residents also bringing up all the elements of the secondary plan, or site-specific area policies, and which is going to be a secondary plan in the new OP, all of those aspects that it did not meet. That is why they are asking for a secondary plan amendment. That is why they are back here before committee and council asking for that.
Okay, thank you for that. And the other one is also very broad based here. So if a councillor like Councillor Kavanagh brings forward a motion and says, I'd like all these things that are very much site plan to be done, and I'd like the developers to agree to do all these things, what kind of weight does that have, a council motion or planning committee motion, when we have Bill 103 indicating that councillors don't have any authority in site plan issues? Does a motion that lists all these things carry a lot of weight regardless of what Bill 103 says?
I think that's a legal question.
Mr. Mark?
Yes, Mr. Chair. So through the legislation, the province has provided to staff an appointment as opposed to delegation. And so input, I guess the first thing I would say is a motion at committee at this point is really no different than an email from the councillor. There's no, although we've seen a couple recently, there really is, from a legal perspective, no added weight to bringing the motion up at committee. A comment by a councillor would have the same weight. It's something that has to be given serious consideration, but it is a comment. It is not a direction, Mr. Chair.
But if it were a council motion, not just committee?
It makes no difference. The site plan approval function is now, I liken it to the decision that Mr. Buck makes with respect to building code matters. It is an independent decision that is made by a staff person that has been appointed to make that decision. And so as a result of the legislation, the ability of council to direct staff on site plan matters is no longer present.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful.
Okay, Councillor Brockington.
Thank you, Chair. Can staff talk about the independent nature of the various reports and assessments that are conducted for development applications? Talk about the professional designation of the people doing these reports. Talk about the role staff have when these reports come in and they're assessed and they're analyzed and they're reviewed. Talk about the back and forth that goes on, that city staff have the right to ask for more information if it doesn't meet expectations or requirements in that regard. I think it's important to set the table here today. People are calling into question the independence of reports. Yes, it's being done on the dime of the proponent, but I'd like staff to comment, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So through the process, applicants will pre-consult on a proposal, and at that time there's a list of plans and studies that are identified as required to make a complete application. Online on the city's website, there are terms of reference about what that entails and who can do those studies and what their professional accreditation has to be. So for example, for a planning rationale, it has to come from a professional planner. A professional planner is a designation with a board that reviews ethics matters. An engineering study like a wind study or a servicing study has to be done by a qualified professional, an engineer. So then those come in, they are deemed adequate in that they meet the terms of reference, and then staff will go into the details basically of the proposal, reviewing it against provincial policy and official plan policy and other guidelines. So that's the review process that it goes through. That's when there is some back and forth on whether it's appropriate and acceptable. You know, two professionals can disagree on something, but there's that negotiation or that working through issues. And these recommendations and these reports are reviewed by subject matter experts inside the city, planners, engineers, urban designers, and other people with the same professional accreditations as the consultants. And then staff make a recommendation to council, committee and council. Ultimately, it's the decision of committee and council in this case.
Thanks very much for that overview. Proximity to the new LRT station. Do we measure from the property line or from basically the front door where the resident starts walking to get to the station?
So, I mean, we do have a radius. We look at a radius, a 400-meter radius, but in practical terms, and even our new official plan speaks to the fact that there can be, things that obstruct and can make a longer path of travel. For example, a bridge, crossing a highway, something like that. In this case, this is, if you leave the door of this proposed building, you could be at the new station that's under construction within a 5-minute walk.
Okay, and it's council policy that we would like to see density close to LRT and transitway stations. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. Can you explain the non-densification designation, that purple area that the condo president mentioned at the beginning? How does that fit into everything? I know the new OP, although not yet approved, may trump that, but I'm just trying to wrap my head around the significance behind that particular area.
Okay, well, just to clarify, the new OP would not trump that exactly, because the site-specific policies that were done in 2018 will be carried forward into a secondary plan, and the secondary plan gives more detail than the broad policy of the policies of the official plan. However, that being said, I was not the planner working on this secondary plan or this policy work in 2018, but my understanding is that there was a lot of concern from residents about what it would mean to be along a rapid transit route, and a lot of concern about the kind of change that would bring. And so there was some, this Schedule C of the Cleary New Orchard site-specific policies was put in place, and it basically shows areas that are not to be not for density redistribution. That's what it says. I would argue, I guess, that that doesn't apply in a case if somebody comes in and meets the zoning. It would apply if somebody comes in and needs some sort of exception, like a minor variance, or is asking for a severance or something like that. The process, our planning process that falls out of the Planning Act, allows for an applicant to make a request for an exception. That's what we have here today.
If I'm a member of this community and I don't have experience on the planning committee, and I go through this lengthy process with Councillor Kavanaugh and the community, and I see all of these references to where and why this building cannot be built, despite all of your explanations, and I still see the application proceed, one can only understand why members of the public think that the city is not acting in their best interest, because we've passed and approved various plans in the past. And so while I understand what you're saying, as one person mentioned in her comments, that, you know, the die have already been cast. And I think we as a city have to improve on how we communicate and articulate sort of planning process, past decisions, how certain applications apply. And the fact that we are seeing community pushback to density around LRT or transitway stations, Bayshore, Westboro, this one, we can name many others, where in my opinion, this is the right place to do it. It makes sense. Yes, there are wrinkles and crinkles that need to be ironed out, but if not density here, then where? Then the urban core. So I'll have more to say when I listen to more of my colleagues, but and I do think the community has raised some very legitimate concerns, which I'm sure we'll address in the next few minutes. But I just wanted to get some of those points out on the table now, and I'll yield the floor at this time. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councilor Menard.
Thank you very much, Chair. Three quick comments. One is on the secondary plan, the second is on affordable housing, and the third is on parking. Sorry if I'm breaking up here. On the secondary plan, it's more of a comment for next term, but it's difficult when we're in these situations. Councillor Brockton, I think, put it well, where we have something that's been newly approved just 5 years ago, and then an amendment comes forward and we're not supporting what is in the official plan now. That secondary plan is getting carried over to the official plan. So it becomes more difficult for us. We get these battles that occur that seem unnecessary, but they only seem unnecessary because we don't have teams of our staff defending those plans. So we need to get to a point where we're able to bring community, builders, businesses, the councillor and city staff together, do this work, we get agreement, and then we need to defend the plans. So I have a concern on the secondary planning aspect of these pieces. And I think for next term, we really got to work on the process for planning committee. On affordable housing, can staff just go through what provisions this might apply to? We're in a TOD zone here. We've passed direction to staff to work on inclusionary zoning. We got the new community benefits bylaw. I'm hearing the builder talk about sort of market affordability, it seems like here, but it doesn't seem like there's any actual affordable housing in the building. So can you just go through what provisions exist for affordable housing here and why we're not seeing anything in this development at this stage for affordable housing?
This site is not in the the inclusive zoning area, the protected major transit station area. That is the reason why affordable housing is not being required, but can be encouraged.
Okay, why isn't this area, because this is right next to our LRT, right? So why wasn't this included?
I would have to defer to a policy planner on that one. We can try to find the answer for you, Councillor Menard.
Royce Fu is here, who may have a comment.
My understanding is that the major stations of the LRT line were being.
Royce, you are very quiet. We cannot hear you.
Is better, Chair?
It sounds about the same.
Is this better, Chair?
That's much better. Thanks, Royce.
Okay. Yeah, sorry about that. My understanding is that the major transit stations on stages 1 and 2 of the LRT were deemed to be the protected major transit station areas, and clearly in order to transit station is not the same sort of level of those transit stations, so it did not get that protection in the new official plan.
Okay, yeah, maybe we need to revisit some of that in the future, because this is the type of building you'd want some affordable housing in. There's 312 new units going in an area where there's a lot of other towers close to LRT, great walkability and biking in this area. So it makes sense to put some affordable housing in these buildings. So we, again, as a city, maybe the inclusionary zoning will, affect this when we get our policy sorted out on that early next term. But this is one that we can't have buildings go up this way anymore in the city without affordable housing baked in. It's got to stop. So that's a disappointment for this one. I guess the third point I'll make is around the parking. So I just want to get clarity from staff. They're saying that they're combining the underground parking for the new building with the old building, or the other with the current building right next door. And I'm just trying to understand how much parking is in that existing building right now, and how can we say that ratio would go down as a result of combining the existing building with the new building. I'm just trying to understand that a bit better.
Okay, give me a second to look up the exact numbers for you, Councillor. My hunch is that when this building was built, the older building, parking rates would have been much higher than they are today. So even if we're adding parking, the ratio would go down.
Okay,
I can get you the exact numbers in just a second.
Okay, it's odd to me that we would combine though an existing building with a new building and then say that, because they're saying the parking's for both buildings, right? They're adding it to the existing building as well, they're saying. And I don't, maybe the applicant needs to respond to this, but I'm not understanding, like for the building itself, it looks like a 1-to-1 ratio to me. So I just would love, clarity when you can. And Allison will come back once, I'm happy to come back once you find that information, or even if it's the applicant that can just explain more of how much parking's in the original building and how this combination is normally supposed to work for these applications. I'll come back when you're ready.
I have a figure here.
Okay.
There are 77 parking spaces in the existing underground parking. There were additional parking spaces in the surface parking lot for the existing building that's now being redeveloped. The proposal is to redevelop it. So those surface parking areas would be replaced with the new building. And there were 254 spaces altogether existing, and 440 are the number that are currently proposed. 440 spaces are currently proposed.
440 for the existing building and the new build of the 312 units.
Right. I mean, perhaps the owner can speak to this more, but it's a rental building, so you know, people may not own a space, so they may have a flexible arrangement with the parking.
Okay. I'd love to see that ratio come down further, especially in this area. So I hope that there's something that comes of this, and we can make that change today or shortly, because it just doesn't make sense to develop a city this way any longer. Again, on the affordable housing piece, on this piece, I'm not, these applications, our policy needs to change so that these applications come in a different fashion, because we're not building the city properly when we're doing this sort of thing. So I appreciate the answers very much from staff and the applicant's proposal. And thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Councilor Menard. Councilor Kavanagh.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to my colleagues for their questions. How much is taken into consideration about future developments that are on the books right now? The cumulative effect on the community. We've talked about density, and we're not just talking about the current density, and we're not even just talking about the density that would be added with this building. We're talking also about the density of projects that are applications, rather, that are also being proposed and probably pretty likely. I think that is a major concern, and how much is taken into consideration in terms of the fact that there's nothing there right now. And I'm concerned about the fact that we have no pressure to put on for commercial development to give back to the community things to be walkable to. It's a bunch of high rises, and there's nothing to walk to. And how can we get that in? Because we have a secondary plan that got put forward, and we're ignoring it. And that's a real slap in the face to community members who worked very, very hard on it and thought they had something. And here I am working on other secondary plans, and I don't feel confident in telling residents this is the way it's going to be when we've ignored one that only got put in 4 years ago. So I know this a lot, but I really need to know how are we taking the whole picture into consideration if we ignore the secondary plan?
Okay, so I think you have 3 points or questions there. So impacts, the lack of commercial and how that contributes to the livability and the goals of the 15-minute neighborhood, and then finally the issue of the policy change. Okay, so in terms of impacts at this stage, I believe it was the applicant who mentioned this. What staff are looking at is the massing of the building. The density is permitted through that floor space index. So the adequacy of the services are there. We're looking at the impacts in terms of that added population to the to the street and to the overall transportation network, but that is adequate as well. It will change the way things are today, but it is still acceptable. That impact is still acceptable. The other kinds of impacts people are talking about, many of those are the level of detail that we get into at a site plan application, such as noise, what the building design will be, elevations, materials, landscaping. Trying to think of some of the other things that were brought up. The impacts, however, on to the existing residents and their obstruction of views is not something that that staff really take into consideration in terms of functionality. Of course, it's an impact, and of course, it's a meaningful impact to the people who live there. What I look at when I review a proposal is it functional? And there will always be impacts. The question is whether they are acceptable impacts. The question about the 15-minute neighborhood. So the idea is to evolve towards a 15-minute neighborhood where people can walk or bike, meaning take active transit or active transportation to meet their day-to-day needs. They may not have a doctor, if that's not a day-to-day thing, They may have to travel further, but this is for day-to-day needs. It's always a chicken and an egg, which comes first, the population or the services and the facilities. The applicant, Lisa, mentioned that the zoning here does allow for commercial uses. The question is whether the market will bring those. So from a planning perspective, the conditions are there for that mix of uses. The market will decide if it's reasonable, if there are enough people there to support it. Your final question, I guess, was more, I think, what Councillor Brockington was mentioning about the issue with the policy change so soon after it's gone through a policy review. So the work that was done in 2018 was done in a general sort of way, looking at the opportunities and constraints. In this situation, the proposal here is for a very specific property. What are the specific opportunities and constraints? What are the specific impacts? Many of the questions today were very specific, beyond even, the zoning and official plan, things that we don't have information on until we get to a site plan level of detail. The process allows for that. I think I said it before. I think that the community was concerned about a transit station being located in this area and what that would mean for intensification. And the community worked with the city to put in place some kind of some policies that would require these things to go through a more inspection before they could be approved. And that's what's happening now.
Thank you. I think overall, I think this is more for our policy staff, is how how we communicate with residents, because they think that what we've put in place with the secondary plan is good, and then we say, well, no, it's out of date after 4 years, and we've moved on. I think that there's genuine distrust when we do that, and I want to know how to rebuild it, because it's very difficult to defend something that changed so quickly. And like I said, I have more secondary plans in the works, so I got to know that we're going to stick to it. What can we do better? Because right now, one of the comments was about how many people commented. And there was, people even use petition process, which unfortunately we don't even explain how we're going to go through this process and how their concerns are met. So, but we need things that are written down that show people the process. Why these were put in place. So obviously, when we put the secondary plan in place, we meant it. How can we defend when we make these changes?
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Any other questions, Councillor Kavanagh?
Just a second. We talked about the NCC with the developer, but I want to hear from the city about the relationship there, because that came up, and obviously a big concern, because it's a green space that is very important to the community. And so what discussions were there with the NCC?
Thank you, Chair. The comments that were raised by the NCC were things that would be more addressed through the site plan application. They did not object to the height. The things that they brought up related to the fact that there's a trunk collector sewer and a backbone water main on the NCC's plans. The interface between the private development and their parklands. Impacts to stormwater management to ensure that there would not be any runoff into their lands. that they would need to go through the federal approvals process if there is any construction or impacts to NCC lands, questions about trees and landscaping and any impacts to their lands, and finally about lighting, and again, any impacts to the federal lands. So they did not object. In summary, they asked that if anything is happening on federal lands or has any impacts to federal lands, that they would be involved.
Thank you. Is that the reason why they said no to having a connection? Because basically, I thought it was simple, kind of a hole in the fence type of connection to get to the NCC land. Why would that be refused?
I would have to only guess. I can't speak for the NCC, but I would think that they would want people to go out to the street and then onto another pathway, and that way they can direct people onto, paved pathways and limit people going in through the woods and any impacts that might have.
Okay, thank you. Community benefit. We were asking about that with the developer. Do you have any more information for us on that potential?
This, in terms of the community benefits charge and the community benefits charge bylaw that was recently passed, this site would qualify for the transitions, the in-stream. It's an in-stream application that would qualify for transitions. In terms of any community benefits that have been offered up by the owner, I'm not aware of anything specifically, but I think we could ask the owner who's here today.
Okay, thank you. One of the questions I asked to them was about having something commercial, and they haven't said no. So it could. I just want to make sure that wouldn't be considered under the community benefit charge. I just want to make sure that this is actually
no, that would not. No.
I want to make that absolutely clear. The other question is about arterial versus residential roads. The fact that this question came up a lot. The fact that you can intensify and add more density to what is not an arterial road. What is the comments from the city on that?
Again, this is the reason, one of the reasons why this particular development needs a site-specific amendment. The applicant has asked us to consider the specifics of this site and whether density is appropriate in this location, even though it's not directly on an arterial road. And in my planning opinion, it's still functional. The traffic that will exit the site and use the signalized intersections at Ambleside or New Orchard can be accommodated on those local roads, and it's within a 5-minute walking distance of a transit station.
Thank you. And I appreciated the comments from Councillor Brockington about the fact that we delegate the traffic studies to the developer. I would like to know if we could consider not doing that in the future, like asking the developer to perhaps give us the equivalent charge and having us do it. I think there's a big trust issue that is there of it sounds like there's some flexibility in how you measure traffic, and I'd like to build some trust there. Is that something that could be considered for the future?
So just to clarify, it's not the developer who does the study, but rather the developer pays a qualified professional who is a member of an accredited association to conduct a study in accordance with the terms of reference that the city sets out for its transportation impact assessment. So it's the developer who pays because it's for their private development that the study is being done. I don't see that it, in my view, is something the city should undertake at the city's cost. Rather, the city reviews what the developer proposes.
Okay, I guess I'll have to disagree, because if it's done under their dime, it'll be done to, be positive. So I guess that's something we have to look at in the future. So, okay, I'll leave it there. Thank you so much.
Okay, Councillor Leeper.
Thank you very much. And Allison, forgive me, I'm probably going to be a little pedantic on this one, but when you were answering an earlier question with respect to what has changed, what is the change in the environment that would lead you to want to recommend approval for this development, you started to go down a path of talking about the higher intensification targets we have. You talked about a lot of the intensification arguments. I just want to make it sure that it is crystal clear that if this gets approved, this is not an intensification question, that the intensification is allowed as of right, that there is the potential to build 312 units on this property today with the zoning that exists, and that the real question is, should we or should we not allow those 312 units to be built into a form that is different from what is contemplated in the secondary plan? Am I accurate in characterizing it like that?
It's never a black and white answer in planning. So yes, the developer and the applicants put forward some examples of what could be built under the existing zoning, but they could not go directly to a building permit and be issued that. And Lisa mentioned that would have to go through a site plan process. So it's a little hypothetical because we haven't looked at it through that site plan process. Like, what would the access be functional? Would the garbage and loading be functional? Is the design, does it meet the design guidelines that we have? So it is the zoning would allow it, but there's a bigger process to go through for a building of this scale.
Completely understood. I mean, I took a look at the 3 building proposals surrounding the one, and that's 3 elevators that they would have to build instead of 1. 3 different loading facilities. They're probably never going to build multiple smaller buildings on the site. I don't think it would be economic. But the slab building, I will take Rod at his word that he could actually build that building at 13 stories and still get something like 312 units in here. We're not looking at approving this building because it adds more density than what the zoning allows. The crux of this question is, if we approve this, it's because we think the built form is better than what is contemplated in the secondary plan. The secondary plan doesn't contemplate redistribution of density on the site, and specifically speaks against it. I'm guessing that is because people wanted to, when we did the secondary plan, by maintaining buildings at 13 stories, that would preserve views for people who were concerned about the potential for really tall towers to go in. Okay. Sorry, go ahead.
You're right that in terms of that bar building, what staff is recommending approval on this one as a better design alternative than that bar building.
Yeah, but you're not recommending approval because it's going to allow us to put more people into a site where we hadn't contemplated that many people.
The FSI gives the density. That's correct.
So many of the impacts, if they were to build that bar building, the traffic impacts would be the same for anyone who is living below that 13-story limit. The view impacts are the same. Presumably the noise and the garbage impacts are all the same. What changes if we make it a taller building is more of a visual impact than anything else, right? It's not a question of putting more people onto this property than are allowed under the current zoning. So it's not a question of denying it because it's going to add more people than local amenities can support, for instance. This really is about the built form, and I think that's absolutely critical for folks to understand. I'm sorry, can I just take you through the parking one more time? There are 254 spots that exist today at the one building, or shared among the 2 properties. Okay, and the total parking that is available will be 440 spots once this development is done.
Correct.
So that's a net new number of spots of 186. So 186 new spots to serve 312 new residential units. So the parking ratio, or 186 spots, is 59% of 312 units. If we were to bring this to a 0.5, we would only allow 156 net new parking spots. Is it within our purview at committee to cap the parking?
Perhaps we can ask Mr. Mark. I believe it can be done in the zoning. I would like to hear from legal team.
Is Mr. Mark with us? He may have stepped away.
Chair, I don't see him on the call.
Okay. You know what? I'm not going to put that motion forward today anyways, because obviously the applicant wouldn't have had a chance to talk to it. But I would anticipate chatting with many of you about a reduction in the number of parking spots by way of motion at council by 30 to bring it down to 156. And the additional space in the parking garage could be used to offer, better, more secure bike parking and a bike workshop, better storage facilities for stuff in the building, things like that. So I'll just telegraph that now. I'll leave it there. Thank you very much, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Curry.
And I just have basically just a comment on all of this. So just in terms of the, what may be perceived as a lack of respect for the community's efforts in creating a secondary plan. And really, I think all of us need to realize that we have secondary plans as well. Community comes out, spends tons of time creating them, and then they're potentially disregarded in some ways. I feel for Councillor Kavanagh here because, I don't know if this is what she's thinking or what we're actually going to talk about later on with what Councillor Leeper is saying. But if there was an equivalent, say, if we're going to disregard that there's an arterial road condition here and there's no arterial road, then where's the offset? Almost like we would have to do in the budget deliberation. If we're going to disregard this part of the secondary plan, where's the offset? If it was to be human scale, then what's the offset? You get a better view. I understand what this is fundamentally about, but at the same time, it does cause us problems when we disregard what the community has come out and told us and agreed to with the secondary plan. I understand that this is not about density, Councillor Leeper's comments that this is fundamentally about just changing the built form. But if that were the case, that there was an increase in density, then what's the offset? That for sure the inclusionary zoning regulations would come in. I know they're not official yet, but that there would be that requirement. I think that may be a way to build trust when we disregard elements of a secondary plan. So I'll just make that comment, but I would look forward to whatever people are going to do between now and council. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Kavanagh.
Well, thank you. I think I'd be the last one to speak, as it turns out. I want to thank my colleagues for all their questions. They were excellent. And again, thank the residents for coming out and putting forward their statements that were well thought out. I appreciate their input very much. Up until July 1st, we had the possibility of removing delegated authority on site plan applications, which we no longer have. And so this is a change. As I'm just making this clear to residents that it used to be we could look at site plans back at planning committee, but that was taken away, not by us, by the way. This was the province that removed that. But I'm asking Allison and team about how we can still look at input for site plan, some of the issues that we've raised. Parking apparently can be done under the zoning, et cetera. But but affordable housing is still a concern. There could be other aspects, and that we need communicated to the developer. The commercial aspect, I guess it's a tough one because we just don't have anything on the books that say you must. As Tim Marks pointed out, so what can we do? Can we give a list of concerns to bring to site plan? Because obviously we can't make it a vote at committee anymore.
Site plan is really about like how the details of how the site will accommodate the development. Today, we're talking about the massing and the built form. There you can put something in the zoning, and I think that's what we're hearing Councillor Leeper is indicating. He's putting out there will be a motion potentially to council, so that is an option, putting something in the zoning. Not everything has to be done as a requirement. Some things can be done because the developer is offering it. So can work on that as well.
Okay, well, thank you again. And I appreciate the comments from staff and the developer, but mostly I have to echo the concerns of the residents. This is a biggie to an area that was already very much a high density area and remains a concern. We do want transit oriented development, but we're not getting the things that we wanted from transit oriented development, such as affordable housing, such as reduced car traffic from this. So those remain a concern. So I think we still need to address this. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? I have two quick thoughts. One was just a note on the inclusionary zoning. Although this is not part of a PMTSA, which would qualify. We have asked the province to allow us to extend outside of transit areas and allow us to require inclusionary zoning in any zone in the city, not just near major transit stations. And also on this question of secondary plans and are they set in stone or should they be modified? Secondary plans and zoning bylaws and community design plans and even the official plan, they give us a good framework to start from, but I don't think they can anticipate every single circumstance and individual qualities of a particular site. And I think in this case, if we stick exactly to the secondary plan, we're in a straitjacket that would prevent a better development than what's allowed. And within the Planning Act, developers and applicants are allowed to come to a council and say, can you make an exception here? And it's that extra bit of process, this discussion that we have at Planning Committee, the community meetings, the stakeholder engagement, it's necessary to make sure that if we are granting an exception, that we've had that discussion and really given it the level of scrutiny that it deserves. And in this case, I think what's being proposed is arguably better than what would be allowed as of right. But I appreciate all of the answers from Allison Hamlin and planning staff today. Very helpful in this discussion, so thank you. So we have a technical amendment that Councillor Moffat introduced earlier. So let's deal with that first. On the technical amendment, is that carried?
Carried.
Thank you. And are there any other motions anyone wants to introduce at this point, or any, I guess, a final chance here for questions or comments, wrap-ups if required? No? All right, can we do yays and nays on this one, please, Kelly?
Councillor Brockington,
Yes.
Councillor Cluche,
We.
Councillor Curry,
No.
Councillor Dudas,
No.
Councillor Hubley,
Yes.
Councillor Kitts,
Yes.
Councillor Leeper,
No.
Councillor Menard, Councillor Tierney. Oh, Councillor Menard. I see you on the screen, but I didn't catch your vote. Chair Moffat?
Yes. I'm going to vote no. Thank you.
Okay. And Chair Gower?
Yeah.
6 yeas, 4 nays.
Okay, thank you, everyone. We'll move on now to the other item that we held. It was the additional item that we added to this meeting, the appeal to 933 Gladstone and 1030 Somerset rezoning proposed resolution class 4 designation. This is in Somerset Ward. Mr. Mark, can you give us a very brief overview as to why this is in front of committee, and perhaps that's a good way to start us off.
Yes, I can. When the secondary plan and zoning bylaw was adopted for this area, Mr. Chair, Canadian Banknote, who had been involved throughout the process leading up to the committee consideration of it, expressed a concern that allowing for increased residential at this location could require them, in order to keep their in compliance with their environmental compliance approval, could require them to have to expend significant amounts of money on improvements at their site in order to mitigate the noise. And in fact, committee directed staff to prepare a modification to the proposed OPA, which said effectively that any need to address noise would be at no cost to Canadian Banknote. The official plan and zoning bylaw were adopted. They were appealed to the Ontario, or the zoning bylaw was appealed to the Ontario Land Tribunal. The city and Ottawa Community Housing brought a motion to dismiss the appeal. There was the exchange of documentation as part of that motion, cross-examinations and affidavits. But through what were then, but can now be disclosed, off-the-record discussions that took place while that process was continuing, it appeared to the parties that if these lands were designated as Class 4 under the province's MPC 300 guidelines and the city's environmental noise control guidelines, this would allow the appeal to be withdrawn and for the development to proceed. And so both parties, other than the city, so Canadian Banknote and Ottawa Community Housing, each had noise analyses done to look at whether or not noise levels would fall within Class 4, and found that they would. And Class 4 is a class that does allow for the expansion of residential development in the vicinity of existing stationary noise producers. So the analysis was done. Both consultants concluded that the noise levels would be within the guidelines for Class 4. And so the parties had discussion. Minutes of settlement have been prepared that have not been signed by the city yet. They will be if this report is ultimately carried by council. And this report was brought forward. It is being walked on to committee, Mr. Chair, because there is a desire to get this wrapped up so that OCH can move forward on this file this year. And in order to do that, it had to be before committee today and council on October the 5th. That is the background to this matter, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mark. We do have representatives from Canadian Banknote and from Ottawa Community Housing in case councillors have questions, but I'll also ask, so we have Alexandra Sedvari and Jennifer King from Canadian Banknote and Emma Blanchard from OCH. To the representatives from Canadian Banknote, did you wish to address committee today with any comments?
Good morning, Mr. Chair. My client is here today and is available if you have any questions for him, but we don't have any submissions to make.
Okay, and to Emma Blanchard from OCH, did you have any comments for the committee today?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. We certainly support all of the recommendations that are contained in the staff report, and certainly OCH is in favor of this approach, which will allow it to move forward with its development of phase 1 on this Gladstone site. So this is a great development from OCH's perspective and a good outcome. And we would thank Mr. Mark and staff for their presentation today.
Okay, thank you. So Emma and Jennifer, stay with us here on the screen. Councillor Brockington, you have a question?
Yeah, I think it needs to be stated, what is the agreement that we have come to the point now? There's been disagreement and friction up to this point, and I think it needs to be explained for this to the committee. Where are we? And has the Canadian banknote agreed? Are they satisfied with where we are at this point? I think that needs to be clearly stated.
Mr. Chair, I can answer the first, and of course, Ms. King would have to answer the second. The first, in summary, is that the Ottawa Community Housing property at 933 Gladstone and part of 1030 Somerset, as shown on document 1, will be designated as class 4 for the purposes of noise control, NPC 300, and the environmental control noise guidelines. That is what its committee and hopefully council is doing.
Okay, good. And Canadian banknote, you are satisfied?
Yes, Canadian banknote is satisfied with this outcome. And again, thanks city staff and OCH for reaching this solution. This does satisfy CBN's Canadian banknotes concerns. Yes.
Great. I'm pleased that we have got to this point finally. I know there were a lot of issues to iron out, but it seems that all parties are satisfied. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions from committee? Okay, so the report recommendations are that Planning Committee recommend to Council that 933 Gladstone and 1030 Somerset be designated as a Class 4 area within the meaning of provincial guideline NPC 300 and the city's environmental noise control guidelines, and that the property be listed as a Class 4 area within Appendix A to the city's environmental noise control guidelines, and the noise bylaw 2017-155 as amended be further amended by the addition of the site-specific provisions set forth in document 2. So are the report recommendations carried?
Carried.
Carried.
Carried. Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Okay, we have no in-camera items today. There is a IPD information previously distributed on city priorities for community benefits at LeBreton Flats. Are there any notices of motion for the next meeting? No. Okay. Any inquiries? No other business today. Our next meeting is Thursday, October 27th, the final planning committee meeting of the term, and we are adjourned for today. Thank you, everyone.